Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've been holding this in for way too long. I need to get this off my chest because it's been sitting with me for most of my life. I was only 7 years old when it happened, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Some memories fade, but this one's burned into my brain. It was the summer of 1977. Star Wars had just come out in theaters, and like every other kid, I was obsessed with it. My parents had taken me to visit my grandparents in Graham, Washington for 2 weeks during summer break. If you've never been there, Graham is this super rural area surrounded by these massive, dense forests. My grandparents' house was this old wooden place that smelled like pine and my grandma's cooking. They had this huge backyard that just sort of melted into the forest. My grandpa was really into hiking, and he knew all these trails through the woods like the back of his hand. He used to tell me stories about the animals that lived out there, deer, raccoons, even black bears sometimes, but he never mentioned anything about what I was about to see. It was a Tuesday, I think. The weather was perfect, not too hot, with this gentle breeze that made the leaves rustle. My parents, grandparents, and I decided to go for a family walk on this trail my grandpa really liked. I remember I was wearing my favorite red t-shirt with a rocket ship on it, and these blue shorts that had grass stains on the knees because I'd been playing in the yard all morning. I was super energetic as a kid, couldn't sit still for more than 2 minutes. So naturally, I kept running ahead on the trail while the adults took their time, talking about boring grown-up stuff. My mom kept calling out, "Robert, don't go too far." But you know how kids are. I'd slow down for a minute, then get excited and dash ahead again. The trail was pretty wide at first, all packed dirt with these tall pines on either side. Sunlight came through in patches, making these cool patterns on the ground. I was pretending I was Luke Skywalker, exploring a new planet, using a stick I'd found as my lightsaber. I remember running ahead around this bend in the trail. Must have been about 100 yards ahead of my family. I could still hear their voices, but they were getting fainter as I rounded this curve where the trail narrowed a bit. The trees got thicker here, and there were these big ferns everywhere. That's when I saw it. I stopped dead in my tracks. About 60 feet ahead of me, standing in the middle of the trail, was this thing. This creature. It was huge, like impossibly tall. At first, my brain couldn't even process what I was seeing. It was standing upright on 2 legs like a person, but it wasn't a person. No way. It was covered in this dark, coarse hair, not like fur exactly, more like really shaggy hair that hung in patches. The color was this deep, dark brown, almost black in some places, and it was built different than any human I'd ever seen. Broader, way more muscular, with these really long arms that hung down past its knees. I just stood there, completely frozen. I wasn't even breathing. The creature was sort of angled away from me, looking at something in the forest. Then, and this is the part that still gives me goosebumps, it turned its head and looked right at me. Its face, I can still see it so clearly. It had this pronounced brow ridge that shadowed its eyes, which were deep set and dark, not like animal eyes, more like human eyes, but different somehow, more aware. Its nose was wide and flat, and it didn't really have much of a neck. Its head just kind of sat on these massive shoulders. We locked eyes for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. I wasn't exactly scared, which is weird to say. I was in shock, disbelief. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, but it wasn't like terror. It was more like awe, like seeing something you're not supposed to see. Then the creature just turned away. It didn't run or anything. It just continued walking. taking these long, smooth strides into the undergrowth on the side of the trail. The way it moved was so fluid, nothing like the jerky, awkward movement you'd expect from someone in a costume. It pushed aside this huge fern that would have been up to my chest, and it disappeared into the thickness of the forest. I stood there for another minute, just staring at the spot where it had vanished. The woods suddenly seemed very quiet. No birds, no rustling, nothing. Just this heavy silence. Then I heard my mum calling my name, and it snapped me out of it. I turned around and ran back to my family as fast as I could. My dad asked why I was breathing so hard, and I just said I was racing myself. I didn't say anything about what I'd seen. I honestly didn't think they'd believe me, and even at 7, I knew how crazy it sounded. When we got back to my grandparents' house, I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the moment in my head, those eyes looking at me. I tried to convince myself it was just a man, maybe a hunter or something. But I knew it wasn't. No human looks like that. The next day, while my parents were helping my grandpa fix something in the backyard, I snuck into my grandparents' little library. My grandpa had all these books about local history and wildlife. I started flipping through them, looking for anything that might explain what I'd seen. And there it was, in this old book about Pacific Northwest legends, Sasquatch.Bigfoot. The descriptions matched exactly what I had seen: the height, the hair, the way it walked upright. There were even some sketchy drawings that gave me chills because they looked so much like the creature I'd encountered. Based on the trees and ferns around it, and comparing it to my own height at the time, I figured this thing must have been around 8.5 feet tall, and the bulk of it had to weigh at least 600 pounds. It was massive, built like a linebacker, but way, way bigger. I kept this to myself for years. I didn't tell my parents or grandparents. I didn't tell my friends back home. Who would believe a 7-year-old kid claiming he saw Bigfoot? They'd think I was making it up for attention, or that I'd watched too many monster movies. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear standing up. It wasn't a man in a costume. The way it moved was too natural, too fluid. The intelligence in those eyes was real. As I got older, I read everything I could find about Sasquatch sightings. So many accounts matched what I'd seen: the height, the build, the behavior. I learned that the Pacific Northwest has had hundreds of reported sightings over the years. The Native American tribes in the area have their own legends about these creatures going back centuries. I went back to visit my grandparents many times after that, and I always hoped I might see it again. I'd wander near that same trail, never alone though, looking for signs, broken branches, unusual footprints, anything. I never did see it again, but sometimes when I was out there, I'd get this feeling like I was being watched. My grandparents passed away years ago, and the property was sold. I don't know if that trail is even there anymore. But sometimes I wonder if that creature is still out there, or maybe it's children or grandchildren moving quietly through those woods. I'm in my 50s now, and I've only told a handful of people about this over the years. Most react with skepticism, which I understand. If someone told me this story, I'd probably have doubts too. But a few people have looked me in the eye and said, "I believe you." Some even shared their own strange experiences in those woods. This encounter changed me in ways I'm still understanding. It gave me this profound respect for the mysteries that still exist in our world. We think we've discovered everything, catalogued every creature. But what if we haven't? What if there are things out there that have managed to stay hidden, to avoid us almost completely? I've never been the type to chase after Bigfoot hunters or join expeditions. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. I know what I saw that summer day in 1977. Those eyes looking into mine were real. The strangest part, I wasn't scared of it. Not really. Shocked, yes. Amazed, absolutely. But there was no sense of danger. It saw me, acknowledged me, and went on its way. It wasn't interested in hurting me or even interacting with me. It was just passing through, living its life in those ancient woods. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if my family had been with me. Would it have still appeared? Or does it avoid groups of people? Would anyone have believed me if they'd seen it too? Or would they have panicked and scared it away? I've gone back to Graham a few times as an adult, just to walk those woods again. The last time I went, about 5 years ago, I stood at what I think was the same bend in the trail. The forest has changed, some trees have fallen, new ones have grown, but it still has that same feel to it, that same ancient quiet. I stood there for a while, just listening to the forest. Part of me hoped I might see it again, but of course I didn't. Lightning doesn't strike twice, as they say, but I swear, at one point, I heard this heavy rustling in the undergrowth, way off the trail, probably just a deer, but maybe, just maybe, I don't know why I'm finally sharing this now. Maybe because I'm getting older and I don't want this experience to die with me. Maybe because with all the technology we have today, someone might eventually get clear evidence that these creatures exist, and I want my account to be out there. All I know is that on that summer day in 1977, I saw something that wasn't supposed to exist, and it's been with me every day since. Story 2. I've been a hunter for 20 years, but nothing in my experience prepared me for what happened last December. I'm not the type who believes in monsters or goes looking for trouble, but after what I saw, I haven't been able to sleep right for months. I've debated whether to share this at all, but I need to get it off my chest, even if most people will think I'm crazy or making it up. It was early December 2020, and I'd taken a week off work to go deer hunting in the Kiamish Mountains in southeastern Oklahoma. I'd heard from some buddies that the area was relatively untouched, with good hunting and almost no other people around. Perfect, I thought. I needed some time away from everything. The pandemic, the news, all of it. I drove out there alone in my pickup, loaded with my gear, rifle, and enough supplies for 5 days. The drive in was rougher than expected. The dirt roads turned to barely there trails, and I had to park about 2 miles from where I wanted to set up camp. I hiked in with my heavy pack and rifle, following a small creek that wound through the valley. The spot I chose was near a bend in the creek where the water pooled a bit deeper. There was a small clearing surrounded by thick pine and oak trees that provided good shelter from the wind. I set up my tent, organized my gear, and built a small fire pit. The whole time I was setting up, I had this weird feeling of being watched, but I brushed it off. When you're alone in the woods, your mind plays tricks on you. That first night was uneventful, just the normal sounds of the forest. The creek bubbling, wind in the trees, occasional animal calls in the distance. I remember thinking how peaceful it was compared to the chaos of the world with COVID and everything else going on. The next morning, I woke up at dawn, had some coffee and oatmeal, and headed out to track deer. I found some promising signs, fresh tracks, droppings, and rubs on trees where bucks had marked their territory. I spent the whole day following these signs deeper into the forest, making mental notes of good spots for the next day's hunt. I didn't get a shot at anything, but that's hunting sometimes, more tracking than shooting. As the sun started getting low, I decided to head back to camp. The temperature was dropping fast, and I wanted to get a fire going before dark. I was maybe half a mile from my campsite, following the creek back, when I saw it. About 100 yards ahead, there was a large figure kneeling by the creek. At first glance, I thought it might be another hunter, maybe looking for a spot to cross the water. But something felt off right away. The proportions weren't right. The shoulders were too wide, the arms too long. I stopped and slowly raised my binoculars. What I saw through them made my blood run cold. It wasn't a person. The creature was massive, with long, bulky arms and a back that was easily twice as wide as mine. It was covered in thick, dark hair. Not like fur exactly, but more like tangled human hair, only coarser and darker. It was doing something with its hands in the water, pulling something out, maybe fishing. I stood frozen, not sure what to do. Part of me wanted to turn and quietly walk away, but another part couldn't look away. I needed to understand what I was seeing. As I shifted my weight, my boot snapped a twig. The sound wasn't particularly loud, but in the quiet forest, it might as well have been a gunshot. The creature immediately stopped moving. It went completely still, like a statue. Then, very slowly, it began to stand up. That's when I realized just how big this thing was. It had to be at least 7 or 8 feet tall. Its arms hung down to its knees, and as it turned, I could see that its entire body was covered in that same dark brown or black tangled hair. When it fully turned toward me, I saw its face, and that's the image that's been haunting me ever since. The skin on its face was a dark, grayish-brown color, with deep lines etched into it, like an old man who'd spent his whole life in the sun. It had a heavy brow that shadowed its eyes, which were sunken deep in its face. The nose was flat and wide, and below it was a mouth that seemed too large for any normal face. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Its eyes, God, its eyes, they weren't animal eyes. There was intelligence there, curiosity, and something else I couldn't place. Maybe fear, maybe anger. I don't know. Then it took a step toward me. It wasn't aggressive exactly, more like it was trying to get a better look. But that was enough to snap me out of my frozen state. I raised my rifle and fired a shot into the air, not at the creature, just a warning shot to scare it off. The gunshot echoed through the valley, and the creature reacted immediately. It made a sound, kind of a deep grunt that I felt more than heard, and then it moved, for something so big, it was unbelievably fast. It turned and went up the steep hillside at a speed that seemed impossible, pushing through thick underbrush like it was nothing. Within seconds, it had disappeared into the forest. I stood there shaking, my rifle still raised. The whole encounter had lasted maybe a minute, but it felt like hours. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I waited for a few minutes scanning the tree line, but there was no sign of the creature. Finally, I started moving toward my camp, walking faster than before, constantly looking over my shoulder. When I got back to my tent, I immediately built up the fire bigger than I normally would. I kept my rifle loaded and right next to me. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every sound made me jump. The wind in the trees, animals moving in the distance, the creek flowing. I kept thinking I heard heavy footsteps circling my camp, but whenever I shined my flashlight out into the darkness, there was nothing there. As soon as the first light of dawn broke, I left the relative safety of my fire and went to investigate the creek where I'd seen the creature. I needed to know if I'd imagined the whole thing or if there was some evidence of what I'd seen. What I found made my stomach drop. There, in the soft dirt along the edge of the creek, were footprints. Not human footprints, and not bear prints either. These were huge, each one longer than my size 11 boot. They showed 5 toes, like a human foot but much larger and wider. The stride length between them was massive, easily twice what mine would be. I took out my phone and snapped some pictures, though my hands were shaking so badly that most of them came out blurry. There were also some broken branches where the creature had moved up the hillside, and what looked like tufts of dark hair caught on some thorny bushes. I didn't touch those. I didn't want to touch anything connected to that thing. Back at camp, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a bear standing on its hind legs. But no bear moves like that, and no bear has a face like what I saw. A person in a costume? Out here, miles from anywhere in December? It made no sense, and those footprints weren't fake. They'd been pressed deep into the mud by something very heavy. I'd planned to stay 3 more days, but there was no way I was spending another night out there. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could. It took me 2 trips to get everything back to my truck, and the whole time I felt exposed, like I was being watched from the trees. I kept my rifle ready and found myself stopping constantly to listen and look around. On my final trip out, carrying the last of my gear, I heard what sounded like wood knocking against wood. 3 distinct knocks coming from the ridge above me. Then, from another direction further away, came 3 more knocks in response. My skin crawled. I practically ran the rest of the way to my truck. I didn't stop driving until I was back on the main highway, and even then, I kept checking my rearview mirror, like I expected to see that thing lumbering out of the trees after me. It's been almost a year now, and I still haven't told many people about what happened. The few friends I've mentioned it to either think I'm making it up, or that I saw a bear and panicked. One suggested I might have been suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning from my camp stove, making me hallucinate. But I know what I saw. I've done some research since then. I've read about Bigfoot and Sasquatch sightings, and a lot of the descriptions match what I saw. I never believed in that stuff before, thought it was all hoaxes and people mistaking bears for monsters. Now, I don't know what to believe. All I know is that there's something in those mountains that isn't supposed to exist. Something that watches from the trees and considers that place its territory. I went somewhere I wasn't meant to go, saw something I wasn't meant to see. I haven't been hunting since that day. My gear sits untouched in my garage. Sometimes I look at those blurry photos on my phone and wonder if I should delete them or show them to someone who might take me seriously. But mostly I try not to think about it at all. Because when I do, I remember those intelligent eyes staring back at me, and I can't help but wonder, what if it's out there right now, watching someone else who wandered too far into its territory, and what if next time it doesn't just walk away? Story 3. I've never shared this story with many people. Most times when I try, I get those looks. You know the ones, where people think you're either crazy or making it up. But what happened to me back in '71 was real, and I still get chills thinking about it. It was July, summer of 1971. I was 14 years old and had this Honda 100 motorcycle that was basically my whole world. My parents had finally trusted me enough to let me ride around on my own, and I spent every free minute exploring the back roads of Baraga County. We lived in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, beautiful country, but remote as hell. Miles and miles of forests, lakes, and hardly any people. That day started like any other summer day. It was warm, but not too hot. Perfect riding weather. I remember wearing my favorite t-shirt, this faded blue one with some band logo that I thought made me look cool. And jeans. No helmet because, well, it was the '70s and nobody cared much about that stuff back then, especially out in the sticks. I decided to check out Petticoat Lake Road, which was this winding dirt road that hardly anyone used. I'd been down parts of it before, but there were all these little side roads and old logging trails branching off that I hadn't explored. When you're 14 with a motorcycle, that's like finding hidden treasure. About an hour into my ride, I noticed this overgrown driveway I'd never seen before. It was almost hidden. You'd miss it if you weren't looking carefully. Something about it caught my attention. Maybe it was just that teenage curiosity, that need to see what's around the next corner. I remember thinking maybe there'd be an old abandoned place I could check out. I turned onto this narrow path and immediately the brush closed in around me. It was so overgrown that I had to slow down to barely a crawl. Branches and tall grass scraped against my legs, and I had to keep my feet out sometimes to balance. The Honda's engine puttered quietly as I inched forward. I remember the smell, that green, earthy smell of crushed vegetation and damp soil. The path was so tight that I started wondering if I should turn back. It was like riding through a tunnel of greenery. My handlebars kept catching on branches, and I had to duck under others. But I kept thinking it had to open up eventually, and I was right. After fighting through maybe 50 yards of this mess, the brush suddenly gave way. The path widened and opened up under this canopy of tall trees, mostly maples and oaks. The forest floor was relatively clear here, with dappled sunlight breaking through the leaves overhead. I remember feeling relieved as I straightened up and gave the bike a little more gas. That's when it happened. I'd gone maybe 30 yards along this wider section when something moved fast from the left side of the road. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was big, way bigger than a person. And it was running across the road about 30 yards ahead of me. Running, not lumbering or shuffling, but running like an athlete. 2 legs, arms swinging, but covered in dark hair, dark brown or maybe black. It was hard to tell in the forest shadows. My first thought, and this sounds so stupid now, was that someone was playing a joke, like who would be out here in a gorilla costume. That's literally what went through my 14-year-old brain for a split second. But then reality hit me like a physical blow. This thing was at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller, and it moved with a kind of fluid grace that no costume could mimic. It crossed the entire width of the clearing in just a few strides, never even glancing my way. The way it ran was almost human, but not. Its arms were longer, its stride more powerful, and it was fast, like unnaturally fast for something that size. I only saw it for maybe 3 seconds before it disappeared into the thick forest on the right side of the road, but those seconds are burned into my memory forever. The way its muscles moved under that hair, the slight hunch in its shoulders, the dark, massive silhouette against the green background. I don't remember making a conscious decision to leave. 1 second I was frozen, watching this impossible thing vanish into the trees, and the next, I was spinning my bike around so fast I nearly dropped it. I remember the handlebars jerking violently, my foot slipping off the peg. I bent the left foot peg and one of my mirrors. Didn't even notice until later. Then I was gunning it back through that overgrown tunnel of brush, not caring anymore about branches or balance. Twigs whipped my face and arms. I think I was making some kind of noise. Not quite screaming, but this weird, tight breathing. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I finally broke out onto Petticoat Lake Road, I twisted the throttle all the way. The Honda wasn't exactly a racing bike, but I pushed it as hard as it would go. The engine whined in protest as I flew down that dirt road, taking corners way too fast, the back wheel fishtailing on loose gravel. I kept looking back over my shoulder, convinced that thing was chasing me. The rational part of my brain knew it had gone the other direction, but fear isn't rational. All I could think was that I needed to get home, get somewhere with people, get away from those woods. By the time I reached the main road, my hands were cramping from gripping the handlebars so tight, my knuckles were white, and I was covered in sweat despite the cool forest air. I remember stopping at this little gas station about 5 miles from where it happened, just to be around normal people for a minute. The old guy behind the counter asked if I was okay. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. "You look like you've seen a ghost, kid," he said, and I almost laughed hysterically because what I'd seen was so much worse than a ghost. At least ghosts aren't real. At least that's what I'd always believed. I mumbled something about taking a spill on my bike and used their bathroom to splash water on my face. My reflection in that grimy mirror showed wide eyes and little scratches from the branches. I looked like a scared little kid, not the tough teenager I thought I was that morning. When I finally got home, my mom asked what happened to my face, why I was so pale. I told her I'd gotten spooked by a bear. It was the only thing I could think of that she might believe. Even then, I knew what I'd seen wasn't something most people would accept. It wasn't something I could accept, and I'd seen it with my own eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing it, that massive figure running with that unnatural speed and grace. I tried to convince myself it was just a bear, walking on its hind legs, or maybe a really tall man in dark clothes. But I knew better. What I'd seen wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I knew of. A few days later, I finally worked up the courage to tell my dad. We were in the garage, and he was helping me straighten out that bent foot peg on my Honda. I figured he'd laugh or tell me I was making it up. Instead, he got real quiet, this strange look on his face. "Whereabouts was this?" he asked, and when I told him, he nodded slowly. "I've heard things out that way," he said after a long pause. "Last fall, when I was hunting near Petticoat Lake, middle of the night, heard wailing sounds like nothing I ever heard before. Not a wolf, not a cougar, something else." He didn't say Bigfoot or Sasquatch or any of those names. He didn't have to. The fact that he didn't dismiss me outright scared me more than if he'd laughed. I found out later there was an abandoned cabin back where I'd been riding. That overgrown drive had been leading somewhere after all. My dad said it had been empty for years. There's a camp there now, I'm told, though I've never gone back to check, and that's the thing. I didn't go back into those woods for years. I sold my Honda the following spring and didn't own another motorcycle until I was in my 20s. I made excuses when friends wanted to go camping or hiking in that area. Just couldn't bring myself to go back. Looking back now, I realize what struck me most about the encounter wasn't just how big this thing was, it was how it moved. Most of the stories you hear talk about Bigfoot having this slow, lumbering walk, but what I saw moved like an athlete. Fast, coordinated, powerful. I've sometimes wondered if maybe it was a younger one, like maybe they get slower and more lumbering as they age, the way we do. Another thing that's always bothered me, it didn't seem to notice me at all. It was in a hurry to get somewhere, focused on something else entirely. I was just a kid on a bike who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or the right time, depending on how you look at it. I'm 57 years old now, and I've never seen anything like it again. Never wanted to, honestly. But I know what I saw, and sometimes when I'm driving through wooded areas, especially up in the UP, I catch myself scanning the trees along the roadside, just in case. The weird thing is, I'm not even sure what I'd do if I ever saw another one. Part of me would want to get proof, the kind of proof I didn't think to get when I was 14 and terrified out of my mind. But another part of me thinks maybe some things are better left alone. Maybe there are things in this world we're not meant to understand or explain. All I know for sure is that for about 3 seconds on a sunny July afternoon in 1971, I saw something impossible running through the woods of Baraga County, and no matter how many decades pass, those 3 seconds will stay with me forever. Story 4. I still get chills thinking about that night. It's been over 45 years, but I remember it like it happened yesterday. August 10th, 1977. The memory is burned into my brain. Me, Greg, Dave, and Mike had planned this canoe trip for weeks. We were all in our early 20s, working construction jobs around St. Louis, and needed to escape the summer heat. The Merrimack River was our go-to spot, far enough from the city to feel wild, but close enough that we could make it a weekend thing. We'd packed light, some fishing gear, a small cooler with beers and sandwiches, and our sleeping bags. No tents. In August in Missouri, you don't really need them, and we liked sleeping under the stars anyway. The plan was simple. Paddle downstream for a few hours, find a good sandbar to camp on, fish, drink a few beers, and head back the next day. The day started perfectly. We put in around noon, the sun high and hot. The river was running clear, and we made good time. Stopped a few times to swim in the deeper pools, caught a few smallmouth bass that we planned to cook for dinner. By late afternoon, we found this perfect sandbar, a wide, flat stretch of sand with a gentle slope down to the water on one side and a steep bank covered in sycamores and oaks on the other. We pulled the canoes up, built a small fire pit, and spent the evening fishing, grilling our catch and shooting the shit like we always did. Nothing unusual happened during the day or evening, just 4 guys enjoying the river, telling the same old stories and jokes we always did. By 11 or so, we'd killed the last of our beers and decided to turn in. The sandbar was wide enough that we could spread out our sleeping bags with a few feet between us. I remember picking a spot closer to the water because I wanted to hear the river as I fell asleep. Greg set up next to me, while Dave and Mike chose spots closer to the tree line. I dozed off pretty quickly, tired from the day's paddling and the beers. I'm not sure exactly what time it was when I woke up. I didn't have a watch on, but the moon was high and full, casting this incredible silvery light over everything. The kind of bright moonlight that makes shadows almost as clear as daytime. I'd guess it was somewhere around 2 or 3 in the morning. At first I thought I'd woken up to take a piss, but then I realized something had disturbed me. There was this feeling, hard to describe, like when you know someone's watching you. The river was making its usual sounds, the gentle rushing of water over rocks. But something felt off. I propped myself up on my elbows and looked around. Greg was still asleep beside me. So were Dave and Mike, further up the sandbar. Then I looked upstream. About 20 yards away at the edge of our sandbar, where it curved back toward the tree line, something was moving, something big. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a deer coming down to drink, but deer don't walk on 2 legs. This thing was stepping into the water, walking upright. Human-like, but not human at all. In the moonlight, I could see it clearly, and that's what makes this so fucking terrifying even now. This wasn't some shadow or trick of the light. This wasn't something glimpsed through trees or fog. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, maybe even 8. But it wasn't just the height, it was the build. This thing had shoulders twice as wide as mine, with this powerful barrel-shaped chest that tapered down to a narrower waist. Its arms were long, hanging down almost to its knees, and they swayed as it walked, not stiffly like someone in a costume, but naturally, fluidly. The whole body was covered in what looked like dark fur or hair. In the moonlight, I couldn't tell the exact color, dark brown or black maybe. The fur wasn't super long, but it was thick, especially around the shoulders and upper back. What really struck me was the head. It had this distinctive shape, a kind of conical form with a pronounced crest at the top, like a sagittal crest you'd see on a gorilla, but more prominent. And the brow ridge. Jesus, I'll never forget that brow ridge. It jutted out over the eyes, casting shadows so I couldn't really see its eyes. Just this heavy ridge line. I was frozen, completely frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't call out. I just watched as this thing walked deliberately into the river. Its gait was smooth but different from a human's, knees slightly bent, taking these measured steps. That's when Greg woke up. I heard him inhale sharply beside me. "What the fuck is that?" he whispered, not really asking me, just reacting. The creature stopped. It turned at the waist, not its whole body, just pivoted at the waist, and looked directly at us. I couldn't see its eyes clearly, but I knew it was looking right at us. I felt it. This wasn't like being spotted by a deer or even a bear. There was intelligence in that look, recognition. For what felt like forever, but was probably just a couple seconds, it stared at us. Then, without any sign of alarm or hurry, it turned back and continued crossing the river. The water where it was crossing was about 3 feet deep. I know because we'd waded through that exact spot earlier to fish. The current there was pretty strong too. Not dangerous, but enough that you had to plant your feet carefully. But this thing, the water only came up to its knees, and the current didn't seem to affect it at all. It just walked straight across, steady, as if it was crossing a parking lot. It reached the other bank and disappeared into the tree line. The whole encounter lasted maybe 10 seconds from when I first saw it until it vanished into the trees. Neither of us moved for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Greg whispered, "Did you see that?" I nodded, still staring at the spot where it had entered the woods. "What the fuck was that?" he asked again. "I don't know," I said. My mouth was dry, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. We sat there for a while, just listening and watching. Part of me expected it to come back, to cross back over, maybe come investigate us. But there was nothing. Just the sound of the river and occasional night birds. "Should we wake Dave and Mike?" Greg asked. I thought about it. "And tell them what? They're just going to think we're fucking with them." Greg nodded. We were both wide awake now, adrenaline coursing through our systems. We decided to stay up, keep watch. We pulled our sleeping bags closer together and sat with our backs to each other, scanning the riverbanks on both sides. I'm not sure if we actually expected it to come back, but neither of us was going back to sleep. We talked in low voices, comparing what we'd seen. Greg had seen the same things I had: the size, the fur, the crest on the head, the pronounced brow. We tried to rationalize it. Could it have been a bear standing up? But bears don't walk on two legs for that long, and they definitely don't cross rivers like that. A person in a costume, in the middle of nowhere at 3 in the morning crossing a river? No way. As the sky started to lighten, we finally relaxed a bit. Dave and Mike woke up around dawn, and we told them what we'd seen. As expected, they laughed it off. "You guys had too many beers," Dave said, "or maybe you were still dreaming." "Yeah, right," Mike added. "Bigfoot just happened to be taking a midnight stroll across your river." We tried to convince them we weren't joking, but they weren't having it. They kept making cracks about it all morning as we packed up. Looking back, I wish we'd gone to check for tracks where the thing had entered and exited the river. But with Dave and Mike mocking us, and honestly with part of me still trying to process what I'd seen, it didn't occur to me. We packed up and headed back downstream to where we'd left our cars. The whole way back, Greg and I kept looking at the shoreline, half expecting to see it again. We didn't. On the drive home, Greg and I talked about it more. The more we discussed it, the more certain we became that what we'd seen wasn't human and wasn't a bear. The way it moved, its proportions, the deliberate way it crossed the river, this was something else entirely. I've gone back and forth over the years about whether to tell this story. I've read books about Bigfoot sightings, watched documentaries. Some of the descriptions match what we saw, especially the crest on the head and the pronounced brow ridge. But I've never reported it officially. Who would believe us? Greg and I still talk about it sometimes. We've never wavered in what we saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a human. It was something else. I've been back to the Merrimack many times since then, but never to that exact spot. I'm not scared exactly, but there's something about knowing such creatures exist, so close to where people live and play, that changes how you see the wilderness. Every shadow between the trees could be hiding something watching you. Every sound at night could be heavy footsteps approaching. Whatever it was we saw that night in August of '77, it knew we were there. It saw us. And sometimes I wonder, if Greg hadn't spoken out loud, would it have just passed by, uninterested, or would it have come closer to investigate us? I don't have answers, just the memory of those 10 seconds that completely changed how I understand the world. There are things out there we can't explain, living alongside us, mostly unseen, and sometimes, if the conditions are just right, a bright moon, a quiet night, a perfect sandbar on the Merrimack, you might catch a glimpse of them as they pass through. Story 5. I've never been the type to believe in weird stuff. I'm what you'd call a practical guy. I fix my own truck, I hunt my own meat, and I generally keep both feet planted firmly on the ground. What happened in Tuscarora State Forest back in October 2019 doesn't fit into my normal world, and I still don't know what to make of it. I've kept this mostly to myself for years because, well, who wants to be that crazy guy talking about monsters in the woods? But I need to get this off my chest. It was the second weekend of bow season, and I'd been looking forward to it for months. My buddy Mark and I had been planning this trip since summer, just a weekend away from the daily grind, hunting deer in Perry County. Mark's brother Tom and his friend Kyle were joining us too, but they were planning to set up on the other side of the ravine, maybe a mile away from our position. I brought my dog Max with me. He's a black lab mix, about 7 years old at the time. And while he's not a hunting dog by training, he's good company and usually stays quiet when we're in the stand. He's always been reliable that way, which is why his behavior that day stood out so much. We'd arrived at our spot around 5 in the morning. It was one of those perfect October days, crisp and cool, maybe 45 degrees, with that smell of fallen leaves in the air. We were positioned on a hillside, overlooking a pretty deep ravine. The spot gave us a good view of a game trail that ran along the bottom where the deer liked to travel. The forest was mostly oak and maple, with lots of underbrush and some rocky outcroppings. Typical Pennsylvania woods. Things were normal for the first few hours. We saw a couple of doe at first light, but nothing worth taking a shot at. Around 9 in the morning, though, Max started acting weird. At first, it was just his ears perking up, his body going stiff. I gave him the hand signal to stay quiet, thinking maybe he'd caught wind of a deer approaching. But instead of settling down, he got more agitated. He started making this low growl that I'd never heard from him before. Not aggressive like when a stranger comes to the door. This was different. It was almost like he was afraid. I remember thinking that was strange, because Max isn't easily spooked. I've seen him face down a black bear that wandered into our campsite 2 years ago without so much as a whimper. "What's up with Max?" Mark whispered, lowering his bow. "Not sure," I said, trying to calm the dog with my hand on his back. I could feel his muscles tensed up tight under his fur. Maybe he smells something. For the next half hour or so, Max kept looking down into the ravine, sometimes whining, sometimes growling. He wouldn't settle no matter what I did. I started to get annoyed because any deer in the area would surely be spooked by his behavior. "Maybe I should take him back to the truck," I whispered to Mark. Mark shook his head. "Let's give it a bit longer. Whatever's got him worked up might move on." But Max only got more agitated. He started barking, not his usual deep woof, but these sharp, urgent barks that echoed through the ravine. I was about to grab his collar and drag him back to the truck when Mark suddenly grabbed my arm. "Look," he said, pointing down into the ravine. "Something's moving down there." I followed his gaze to where 2 smaller ravines came together, about 200 yards away. At first, I didn't see anything except trees and brush. Then something moved. It stepped out from behind a cluster of trees, and for a second it just stood there in the open. My first thought was that it was a person. The shape was human-like. But immediately I knew something was off. It was shorter than an adult, maybe 5 feet tall, and its proportions were all wrong. Its arms hung down at its sides, but they seemed too long for its body, reaching almost to its knees. Its chest and shoulders were broad and powerful looking, much wider than you'd expect for something that height, and it was covered, completely covered, in thick reddish-brown hair. Not clothing, not a coat. Hair like an animal's coat, but cleaner and more uniform than a bear's fur. The hair wasn't matted or patchy, it looked almost groomed. The thing stood there for maybe 3 seconds, but it felt much longer. The weirdest part? It looked right at us. I don't mean it glanced in our direction. I mean it turned its head deliberately and stared directly at where Mark and I were standing. I couldn't make out its face clearly from that distance, but I felt its eyes lock onto us. Then it moved. 2 quick steps, not running exactly, but faster than a human would move, and it disappeared up the smaller ravine it had come from. The way it moved was so fluid and silent. No crashing through brush, no sound of footsteps. It was just there one moment and gone the next. Max went absolutely ballistic. He lunged forward, nearly pulling me off balance as I grabbed his collar. His barks turned into these frantic yelps, like he wanted to chase after it, but was also terrified. Mark and I just stared at each other. His face had gone pale. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice barely audible. I nodded. "What the hell was that?" "Not a bear," he said immediately. "Wrong shape. Way wrong shape." "Not a person either," I added. "Unless they're wearing some kind of suit, but who would do that out here?" We both fell silent, trying to process what we'd seen. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I've been in the woods my whole life. I've seen bears, coyotes, bobcats, you name it. This wasn't any animal I recognized. "Let's go check it out," Mark said finally, though he didn't sound enthusiastic about the idea. I wasn't keen either, but my curiosity was overriding my fear. We made our way down the slope toward where we'd seen the creature, keeping Max close. The dog was still on high alert, his hackles raised. It took us about 15 minutes to reach the spot. There was nothing there, no tracks that we could identify in the rocky soil, no hair caught on branches, nothing. But the air felt different. It's hard to explain, but there was a smell. Not strong, but distinct, kind of musky, like wet dog, but earthier. And despite the cool temperature, I felt uncomfortably warm, like the air around us had thickened. "What do you think it was?" Mark asked as we scanned the area. I shook my head. "I don't know. But it wasn't normal. The way it moved, too quiet, and those proportions." We spent another 20 minutes searching the area, but found nothing conclusive. Max refused to go up the smaller ravine where the creature had disappeared. He just sat down and whined when we tried to head that way. We decided to find Tom and Kyle to see if they'd noticed anything strange. We hiked around the main ravine to their position, which took about 45 minutes. When we got there, they were still in their stand, looking bored. "You guys see anything?" Mark asked them. "Just squirrels," Tom replied. "You?" Mark and I exchanged glances. "We saw something weird," I said carefully. "Not sure what it was." I described what we'd seen. As I spoke, Kyle's expression changed from skeptical to concerned. "Did it look like a kid?" he asked. "Maybe some kid playing in the woods?" "No way," Mark said firmly. "It wasn't a kid. It was covered in hair, and the way it moved wasn't human." Tom laughed nervously. "You guys seeing Bigfoot now? Maybe you should lay off the morning beers." "We haven't been drinking," I said, annoyed. "Max saw it too. He went crazy. Dogs bark at deer, raccoons, whatever," Tom said dismissively. "Doesn't mean you saw a monster." I could tell they didn't believe us. And honestly, I couldn't blame them. If someone had told me this story, I'd probably have reacted the same way. We decided to call it a day. None of us was in the mood to hunt anymore, and frankly, I wanted to get out of those woods. The whole hike back to our trucks, I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like we were being watched. That night at the cabin we'd rented, Mark and I talked it over again, away from the others. "It was short," he said. "Most Bigfoot stories, they talk about them being 7, 8 feet tall." "Yeah," I agreed. "This was smaller, like maybe a young one." "Littlefoot," Mark said with a half smile, and despite the tension, I couldn't help but laugh. But the more we talked about it, the more certain we became about what we'd seen. The height, about 5 feet, the reddish-brown hair covering its entire body, the wide chest and broad shoulders, the long arms, the way it looked directly at us before disappearing so quickly and quietly. "We should keep this to ourselves," Mark suggested. "At least for now. People will think we're nuts." I agreed, and for the next 3 years, I barely mentioned it to anyone. But I kept thinking about it. I started reading about Bigfoot sightings online, and some of the descriptions matched what we saw perfectly. Reports of smaller, juvenile Sasquatches, the reddish-brown hair, the silent movement. The next morning before we left, I insisted on going back to the spot. Something was pulling me there. Mark came along, but Tom and Kyle stayed behind to pack up. Max was reluctant, tugging back on his leash as we approached the ravine. When we got to the area, everything looked normal in the daylight, but then I noticed something I'd missed the day before. About 15 feet up in a large oak tree near where the creature had disappeared, there was a strange arrangement of branches. They were woven together in a way that didn't look natural, almost like a small platform or nest. "Look at that," I said, pointing. "That doesn't look right." Mark stared up at it. Could be a hunter's blind someone abandoned. But it didn't look man-made either. There were no nails, no rope, nothing but branches carefully intertwined, and it was positioned in a way that would give a clear view of the entire ravine, including where we'd been standing the day before. As we stood there looking up, a twig snapped somewhere behind us. We both whirled around, but there was nothing there. Just trees, and silence. But the hair on my arms stood up, and beside me Max began to tremble. I've been back to Tuscarora many times since then for hunting trips, but never to that exact spot. I can't bring myself to go there. Max refuses to go anywhere near that part of the forest now. He plants his feet and won't budge if we head in that direction. I still don't know what we saw that day. A juvenile Sasquatch? Some unknown animal? I keep telling myself there must be a logical explanation, but deep down, I know what I saw wasn't something science has a name for yet. Whatever it was watching us from that tree. It knew the forest better than we did. And sometimes at night, I still wake up with the feeling of being watched by something that moves silently through the trees. Story 6. I don't even know why I'm writing this down now. It's been over 5 years, but I still get sweaty palms just thinking about it. I guess I need to get it out. And I know this community won't think I'm crazy like my parents did. This happened back in May of 2018. When I was 17, me and 8 of my friends decided to have a bonfire out in Nicollet National Forest in northern Wisconsin. This was our spot. A clearing about a mile off the main road that we'd been going to since sophomore year. Nothing special, just this open area maybe 40 feet across, surrounded by thick pine and maple trees. We'd been there probably 24 times before without anything weird happening. That night started normal enough. We all met up around 7 in the evening at the gas station off Highway 8, then drove in 3 cars down the access road and hiked in with our stuff. It was me, Josh, Travis, Ali, Mike, Sarah, Tyler, Caitlin, and Dylan. We had a couple coolers of soda and beer. Yeah, we weren't supposed to have alcohol, but whatever. Snacks, Bluetooth speakers, and all the usual bonfire stuff. The clearing was exactly how we left it last time. There was still charred wood in the fire pit from our last hangout a couple weeks before. We got everything set up. Tyler got the fire going, and we just did the normal teenage hanging out stuff. Music playing, people talking about school drama, complaining about finals coming up, that kind of thing. Everything was completely normal for the first couple hours. The sun had set around 8:30, and by 10 o'clock we were just sitting around the fire. Some people were a little buzzed, just having a good time. I remember I was trying to convince everyone we should all go camping there after graduation. Then Josh suddenly got this weird look on his face and held up his hand for everyone to be quiet. "Did you guys hear that?" he asked. We all shut up for a second, and I didn't hear anything except the crackling of the fire and some far-off owls. "Hear what?" Mike asked. "It sounded like, I don't know, like someone hitting a tree with something," Josh said. "From over there." He pointed into the dark woods to the east of our clearing. We listened for another minute, and I was about to tell Josh he was just hearing things when we all heard it. A clear, distinct knock sound from deep in the trees. It wasn't like a woodpecker or a branch falling. It sounded deliberate, like someone had taken a baseball bat and swung it full force against a tree trunk. "That's what I heard," Josh said, his voice quieter now. We all stared into the darkness where the sound had come from, but couldn't see anything past the edge of the firelight. Then we heard it again and again. 3 distinct knocks, evenly spaced, maybe 5 seconds apart. Knock, knock, knock. "It's probably just some hikers messing with us," Sarah said, but she didn't sound convinced. The woods around Nicollet are dense and not heavily trafficked, especially at night. There are no designated campsites near where we were, and I'd never seen hikers out there after dark in all the times we'd been there. "I'm going to check it out," Tyler said, always trying to be the brave one. He grabbed his phone for a flashlight and started walking toward the tree line. Before he got there, the knocking sound came again, but from a completely different direction. Now from the west side of the clearing, opposite from the first knocks. Like whatever was making the sound had circled halfway around us without making any noise. Tyler stopped and turned toward the new sound. "Hello," he called out. "Is someone there?" That's when it happened. From the northern edge of the clearing, a third direction, came this sound I'll never forget as long as I live. It started as this low, rumbling sound, almost like someone trying to clear their throat. Then it built into this scream that didn't sound human or like any animal I'd ever heard. It rose in pitch until it was this high, wavering howl that seemed to go on forever. It echoed through the woods around us, and I swear I could feel it in my chest. Everyone froze. The music was still playing from our speaker, but nobody moved to turn it off. We were all just staring wide-eyed into the darkness. "What the fuck was that?" Dylan whispered. Before anyone could answer, the scream came again, but closer this time, like whatever made it had moved 20 or 30 feet toward us. Then we heard heavy footsteps, not like a person walking, but heavier with more weight behind them, and the sound of branches breaking. Mike jumped up and turned off the music. "We need to go now." That's when we heard a massive crack, like a small tree being snapped in half, followed by the sound of something heavy being slammed against a tree trunk, way harder than the knocks from before. Panic hit us all at once. Everyone scrambled to grab their stuff, but most people just abandoned everything and started running toward the path that led back to our cars. I remember Caitlin was crying, and Tyler was yelling for everyone to stay together. I was grabbing my backpack when I heard Josh shout, "Holy shit!" That's when I looked up and saw Ali and Travis standing frozen, staring at something at the edge of the clearing. They were the only ones who hadn't immediately run. I followed their gaze, and my entire body went cold. Standing just at the edge of the firelight was something. I've gone over this memory 1,000 times in my head, wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me, if it was just shadows or panic making me see things, but I know what I saw. It was massive, easily 7 or 8 feet tall. Its body was covered in dark hair or fur that looked almost black in the firelight. What struck me most was how wide it was. Its shoulders had to be twice as broad as a normal man's, with this massive barrel chest. Its arms hung down almost to its knees, swinging slightly as it breathed. I could see its hands, not paws like a bear, but hands that looked almost human, just way bigger. Its face was partially shadowed, but I could see its eyes reflecting the firelight with this faint reddish glow. Its mouth was slightly open, and I could hear its heavy breathing even from where I was standing. As we stared at it, frozen in absolute terror, it reached down and picked up what looked like a thick branch, had to be at least 4 inches thick, and swung it against a nearby tree with such force that bark exploded off the trunk. Then it opened its mouth wide and let out another one of those screams, and I could see its teeth in the firelight, large, with pronounced canines. That broke our trance. Travis grabbed Ali's arm, and they both turned and ran. I was right behind them, my heart feeling like it was going to explode out of my chest. I could hear crashing behind us, like it had started to move, but I didn't look back. We sprinted down that path faster than I've ever run in my life, branches whipping at our faces in the dark. We caught up to the others who were already at the cars. Everyone was screaming and crying. I remember Mike couldn't get his key in the ignition because his hands were shaking so bad. Josh was yelling, "Go, go, go," over and over. We piled into the cars, not even caring who went with who, and peeled out of there, spraying gravel everywhere. We didn't stop until we reached the gas station 5 miles away. Everyone gathered in the parking lot, still hyperventilating and trying to process what happened. "Did you guys see it?" Travis asked, his voice shaking. His face was scratched from branches, and I realized mine probably was too. "See what?" Tyler asked. He had been in the front of the group, running out. "That thing," Ali said. She was crying but trying to keep it together. It was standing right there at the edge of the clearing. "It was a Sasquatch," Travis said, and saying it out loud seemed to make it real. A fucking Sasquatch. Some of the others thought we were making it up, or that we'd seen a bear standing on its hind legs. But a bear doesn't make wood knocks from different directions. A bear doesn't have those proportions. A bear doesn't pick up a branch and slam it against a tree as a threat display. We argued about it in that parking lot for over an hour. Eventually, we all went home, leaving most of our stuff back at the clearing. No one wanted to go back for it. I didn't sleep for 2 days afterward. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing standing there, its eyes reflecting the firelight, its mouth open as it screamed. We told our parents, of course. Most of them thought we were exaggerating or that we'd seen a bear. A couple thought we were making it all up for attention. Only Travis's dad seemed to take it seriously. He was into hunting and said he'd heard stories from other hunters about strange things in those woods. A week later, Travis, Josh and Mike went back during daylight to get our stuff. They said the clearing was trashed. The coolers were smashed. Food containers torn open and scattered everywhere. They found broken branches all around the perimeter of the clearing, not fallen branches, but branches that had been snapped off trees about 7 feet up and tossed around. They grabbed what was salvageable and got out of there as fast as they could. None of us have been back to that spot since. Allie's family moved to Minnesota the next year, but we still keep in touch. Sometimes we'll talk about that night, trying to make sense of it. She saw it clearer than I did, and she swears it had a face that was almost human, but not quite. Travis says the same thing. I know what we saw. I know it was real. That thing was intelligent enough to surround us with wood knocks, to intimidate us, to drive us away from its territory. It was deliberate and calculated, and it worked. I've been camping exactly 0 times since that night. I can barely bring myself to hike on well-traveled trails with lots of people around. Every time I hear a weird noise in the woods, my heart starts racing. That's my story. I don't care if you believe me or not, but if you're ever in northern Wisconsin, in the Nicolet National Forest, and you hear wood knocks while you're sitting around your campfire, don't wait around to see what's making them. Story 7. I've always been a solo hiker. There's something about the solitude that clears my mind like nothing else can. I've hiked all over Florida, from Torreya State Park up in the Panhandle down to the Everglades. But what happened to me and with Lakuchi back in March has changed the way I approach the wilderness forever. I remember the day clearly, because it was unusually cool for March in Florida. I'd set out early, around 7 in the morning, with plans to do about 15 miles of the Florida Trail. I'd hiked with Lakuchi dozens of times before. It's one of my favorite spots, with its mix of cypress swamps, pine flatwoods and sandhills. I know that section of the trail like the back of my hand. I was about 7 miles in, feeling good, making decent time. I'd seen a couple of deer earlier and a bunch of birds, but otherwise had the trail to myself, typical for a weekday. I was approaching that section where the trail skirts alongside a marshy area. You know the spot if you've hiked there. It's where the trail narrows a bit and the vegetation gets thicker on both sides. The first thing I noticed was a change in the atmosphere. It's hard to explain, but suddenly the forest felt heavy. The bird sounds that had been constant all morning just stopped, not gradually. They just cut off, like someone had flipped a switch. I remember thinking it was weird, but Florida weather can change quickly, so I figured maybe a storm was coming. That's when I heard it. Footsteps in the brush to my left, heavy ones, pushing through the palmetto thickets. At first I thought it was a deer, or maybe a wild hog. They're everywhere in Florida. I stopped walking to listen better, and whatever it was stopped too. Immediately, like the exact moment my feet stopped moving. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, straining to hear anything, but there was nothing. Complete silence. No birds, no insects, nothing. I started walking again, and within 3 or 4 steps, I heard the footsteps resume on my left. They matched my pace perfectly. Then, and this is when my heart really started racing, I heard the same thing happening on my right side. Heavy footsteps matching mine, stopping when I stopped. I did a quick stop-start test again, and both sets of footsteps did the exact same thing. They were pacing me from both sides of the trail. I'm not ashamed to admit I was scared. I've encountered black bears and wild boars before, but they don't behave like this. They don't coordinate. They don't shadow you from 2 sides at once. I thought about turning back, But whatever these things were, they were between me and my starting point now. I decided to keep moving forward, trying to keep my pace steady so I wouldn't show fear. I didn't have a gun, just my hiking stick and a small knife. That's when the growling started. It wasn't like a bear or a panther. I've heard both before. This was deeper, almost like it was coming from something with a massive chest cavity. It was a rumbling sound that you could almost feel more than hear, and it came from both sides simultaneously. I caught movement through a gap in the vegetation to my left, just a glimpse, but enough to see a large, dark figure moving parallel to the trail. It was tall, well over 6 feet, and covered in what looked like dark hair or fur. The way it moved wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen. It was upright, bipedal, with a huge chest and shoulders and arms that seemed too long for its body. The movement was smooth, deliberate, powerful. Before I could really process what I'd seen, there was movement on my right side too. Another figure stepped partly out from behind a cluster of palmettos about 30 yards away. Same general size and shape as the first one. It stopped when I turned my head toward it, as if it knew I had spotted it. I only saw it for maybe 2 seconds before it stepped back into thicker cover, but it was enough to confirm there were 2 of them. I'm not an impulsive person. I'm trained in wilderness survival. I know that running can trigger a predator's chase instinct, so I kept walking, kept my movements deliberate. But my mind was racing. These things were intelligent enough to coordinate with each other. They were keeping pace with me, one on each side, and they seemed to be deliberately herding me down the trail. For the next mile or so, though it felt like 10, I walked like this, with these creatures flanking me. Occasionally the growling would get louder, especially if I slowed down or looked like I might veer off the trail. A couple times I heard branches snap much closer to the trail than before, as if they were warning me to stay on course. I never got another clear look at them, just glimpses of dark movement through the trees, but I could feel them watching me. Every hair on my body was standing up. I've never experienced anything like that level of primal fear. As the trail approached a clearing where the trees thinned out a bit and the marsh opened up on the right side, the growling started to fade. First from the right side, then gradually from the left as well. I kept walking at the same pace, afraid to show relief in case they were still watching. About a quarter mile later, I realized I couldn't hear them anymore. I didn't run, but I definitely picked up my pace after that. I hiked the remaining 7 miles back to my truck without stopping once. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees, expecting to see them again, but there was nothing. The birds had started singing again. The forest felt normal. When I got back to my truck, I sat there for a long time with the doors locked, trying to make sense of what had happened. I've spent my whole life outdoors. I've studied Florida wildlife extensively. What I encountered wasn't a bear, wasn't a panther, wasn't any recognized animal that's supposed to exist in these forests. I know how this sounds. Before that day, if someone had told me they'd seen a Sasquatch in Florida, I'd have thought they were nuts. But there's no other explanation that fits what I experienced. There were 2 of them. They were coordinating with each other, and they were intelligent enough to know exactly what they were doing. The thing that gets me the most is that they could have easily attacked me if they'd wanted to. Based on their size and the power I sensed from them, I wouldn't have stood a chance. But they didn't. They escorted me out of what I now believe was their territory. They made sure I knew they were there, made sure I kept moving, and then let me go when I reached a certain point. It's been 4 months now, and I've only told a couple of close friends about this. I've gone back to hiking, but never alone anymore, and I haven't returned to that specific section of Withlacoochee. I keep thinking about going back with a camera or audio recorder, but something holds me back. Part of me doesn't want proof. I know what I experienced. There are nights I wake up hearing that deep growl in my head. I can still see that dark figure stepping out from behind the palmettos, the unnatural length of its arms, the deliberate way it moved. I've spent countless hours researching similar encounters in Florida, and I've found enough to convince me that what I saw that day was Sasquatch. I don't expect everyone to believe me. Hell, I'm not sure I would believe it if it hadn't happened to me. But I know what I experienced. There are things in the Florida wilderness that we don't understand. Things that are intelligent and powerful and generally want to be left alone. I think I was given a warning that day, a clear message to stay out of their territory, and it's a warning I intend to respect. The most unsettling part? Sometimes I wonder if they recognized me from previous hikes, if they'd been watching me for years before deciding that day was the day to make themselves known. I still hike other trails, but I'm never fully relaxed out there anymore. I'm always listening for that heavy footstep matching mine, for that moment when the birds suddenly go silent. Story 8. I've been a truck driver for almost 15 years now, hauling everything from furniture to frozen goods across this country. You see a lot of strange things on the road at night. Drunk drivers swerving, weird roadkill, even the occasional naked person running around. Don't ask. But nothing in all my time behind the wheel prepared me for what I saw last Tuesday night. I drive the East Texas routes pretty regularly. It's mostly peaceful, lots of pine forests and small towns. I was on Highway 84, maybe a mile or two outside Mount Enterprise. It was around 11:30 at night, and I hadn't seen another vehicle for at least 20 minutes. This stretch is especially dark. No street lights, just my high beams cutting through the blackness. I remember checking my GPS to confirm I was still on track for my delivery in Nacogdoches by morning. The radio was playing some classic rock station that was starting to break up with static. I turned it down because I needed to focus. I'd been driving since early afternoon and was getting that heavy-eyed feeling. I grabbed my thermos of coffee and took a swig, grimacing at how cold it had gotten. That's when I noticed something moving on the right shoulder of the road. At first I thought it was a bear. We get black bears in East Texas, though they're not common. Or maybe a wild hog. Those things are everywhere and can get huge. Whatever it was, it looked like it was rolling around in the dirt on the side of the road. I eased off the accelerator a bit just to be cautious. You hit a hog at 60 miles per hour, and both you and the hog are going to have a real bad day. As my truck got closer, the thing on the shoulder suddenly stood up. Not like a person who's been kneeling and struggles to their feet. This thing rose in one fluid motion, like it was natural. That's when my heart rate kicked up. Bears don't stand like that. Hogs definitely don't stand like that. I was about 100 yards away now, and this being started walking directly across the highway, walking on two legs, walking like a person, but not quite. It had this strange gait, powerful but almost swinging its arms too much. My high beams hit it full on, and I could see it clearly. I'm not a small guy at 6 feet, but this thing towered over what I'd estimate as a normal human height. Had to be at least 7 feet tall, and it wasn't just tall. It was broad, wide shoulders, thick arms, a massive chest, built like a linebacker, but bigger. The thing that really got me was the hair. It had dark hair covering its entire body, this reddish-black color that looked coarse and uneven, not like a fur coat, but more patchy in some areas, especially dense around the shoulders. In my headlights, I could see it wasn't wearing clothes. This wasn't a person. As I got closer, now maybe 50 yards away, I could make out its face. That's when any doubt I had evaporated. It had this flat, broad forehead that sloped back, with a flat nose beneath it. Not a human face, not even close, but the eyes. Man, the eyes are what still haunt me. They caught my headlights and reflected back this yellowish-orange glow, like a cat's eyes, but bigger, more intense. I kept my speed steady at about 60 miles per hour. I wasn't about to stop, but I wasn't going to accelerate either. Something primitive in my brain was screaming at me not to show fear, not to act like prey. Now, here's the part that still gives me chills. Any normal animal, even a person playing a prank, would have scrambled to get out of the way of an 18-wheeler barreling down on them. This thing did the opposite. It stopped right at the center line of the highway and turned to face my truck directly. Then it started bouncing, like slightly bending its knees and bobbing up and down, and it was beating on its chest with both hands. Not like in a cartoon, but these powerful rhythmic thumps, like a gorilla making an intimidation display, but this was no gorilla. I was close enough now that I had to make a choice, swerve or maintain course. I held steady. Part of me was terrified it might jump at my cab as I passed, but changing direction at that speed could have jackknifed my trailer. As I drove past, it turned its head to follow me. I swear I could feel its gaze boring into me through my driver's side window. I didn't look directly at it, kept my eyes forward, white-knuckling the steering wheel, but in my peripheral vision I could see it was still watching me, still doing that chest-beating thing. I checked my mirrors once I was past it, expecting to see it charging after my truck or something, but it just stood there in the middle of the road, getting smaller in my mirrors until the darkness swallowed it up. For the next 20 miles, I kept looking in my mirrors, convinced it was somehow following me. My hands were shaking so bad I had to pull over at the next rest area to get myself together. I sat there in my cab for maybe 30 minutes, doors locked, trying to process what I'd just seen. The logical part of my brain immediately tried to rationalize it. Someone in a costume, I thought. Had to be. Some jackass in a gorilla suit trying to scare motorists. But the more I thought about it, the less sense that made. We were in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town was miles away. Who would stand out there at 11:30 at night waiting for a random truck to come by? And that suit, if it was a suit, was too detailed, too realistic in its movements. The proportions were all wrong for a person too. The arms were too long, the shoulders too wide. Then I thought maybe it was some kind of escaped animal from a private zoo or something. But what animal stands like that? What animal pounds its chest when threatened instead of running away? And those eyes, those weren't any animal eyes I've ever seen. I've spent the last week trying to convince myself I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me after too many hours on the road. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person in a costume. It wasn't my imagination. What keeps bothering me is how deliberate it all seemed. The way it walked out in front of my truck, the way it stopped and faced me, the chest-beating display. It felt like a message, like it was saying, "This is my territory, you're just passing through." I've been back through that stretch of Highway 84 twice since then, both times during daylight hours. I've slowed down near that spot, looking for any sign, footprints, broken branches, anything. There's nothing, just the same scrubby shoulder and pine trees. I haven't told many people about this. My wife knows. She could tell something was wrong when I got home that morning. I told my buddy Mike, who drives the same routes. He laughed it off, said I'd seen a Texas Bigfoot and should report it to one of those cryptid hunter shows. I didn't appreciate the joke, but I get it. I wouldn't have believed it either if someone had told me. But here's the thing. I've been driving these roads for 15 years. I know what bears look like. I know what wild hogs look like. I know what people in costumes look like. This wasn't any of those things. I've started keeping a loaded shotgun in my cab now. Company policy prohibits it, but I don't care. I'm not driving that stretch unarmed anymore, especially at night. I've also invested in a dash cam that has night vision capabilities. Part of me hopes I never see that thing again, but another part of me wants proof, something to validate what I experienced. The weird thing is, I've been having these dreams since it happened. In the dreams, I'm not in my truck. I'm standing on the highway, and that thing is walking toward me, beating its chest. I can't move, I can't run. And right before it reaches me, I wake up in a cold sweat. I've looked online at some Bigfoot forums since then. There are other reports from that area going back decades. Locals call it the East Texas Sasquatch, or sometimes the Sabine River Beast. Some of the descriptions match what I saw. The height, the reddish-black hair, the chest-beating behavior. It makes me feel less crazy, knowing others have seen something similar, but it also terrifies me, because if what I saw is real, if it's been out there all this time, what else don't we know about? What else is hiding in the dark corners of this country, in the places where the roads cut through but people don't live? I'm scheduled to drive that route again next week, at night. I've thought about calling in sick or requesting a different route, but this is my job. This is how I support my family. So I'll go. I'll have my dash cam running. I'll have my shotgun within reach. And I'll be watching that right shoulder like a hawk the whole way. I don't know if I want to see it again or not. Part of me needs the validation, needs to know I'm not losing my mind. But a bigger part of me hopes that stretch of Highway 84 is empty and boring and normal. Because the alternative, that there's something out there that science can't explain, something that watches us from the woods as we drive by, that's almost too much to process. It changes everything, doesn't it? All our certainties about what's real and what isn't. I'm a practical man. I deal in concrete things, schedules, miles, weight limits, fuel consumption. This experience has shaken me in ways I never expected. I find myself looking differently at the forests I pass now, wondering what's watching me from just beyond the tree line. So that's my story. I don't expect everyone to believe it. Hell, I'm still trying to believe it myself. But I know what I saw on Highway 84 that night, and whatever it was, it knew I saw it too. Story 9. I've been putting off talking about this for a long time. What happened back in 2003 has stuck with me for 20 years now, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. My best friend Jake and I had planned this epic fishing trip up to northern British Columbia for months. We were both big outdoorsmen, spent most of our free time hunting, fishing, camping, you name it. But this trip was supposed to be special. We'd heard about this pristine lake called Lake Stinson from Jake's uncle who'd fished there years ago. Said it was teeming with rainbow trout and Arctic grayling. And best of all, hardly anyone went there because it was so remote. We were sold immediately. We planned for a solid 2 weeks away from civilization, just us, our gear, and the wilderness. The drive up took nearly 12 hours from Vancouver, and then another 3 hours on logging roads that got progressively worse. By the time we reached the trailhead, my old Ford Ranger was covered in mud and pine needles. From there, we had to hike about 4 miles to reach the lake, carrying everything on our backs. It was brutal. But man, when we finally broke through the trees and saw that lake for the first time, crystal clear water surrounded by dense pine forest and mountains, it was worth every aching muscle. We set up camp on a small clearing about 30 feet from the shoreline. Perfect spot with flat ground for the tent, a natural stone fire pit left by previous campers, and easy access to the water. The first 3 days were exactly what we'd hoped for. The fishing was incredible. We caught our limit every day without even trying. The weather cooperated perfectly. Warm days, cool nights, no rain. We'd fish during the day, cook our catch over the fire, drink a few beers, and just soak in the silence. No cell phones, no other people, no cars. Just the sounds of nature. It was perfect. Until the 4th night. I've always been a light sleeper, especially in the woods. Years of camping has taught me to wake up at the slightest unusual sound. That night, around 3 in the morning, something pulled me from a dead sleep. At first, I couldn't place what had woken me, then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving around our campsite. My first thought was bear, obviously. We were in bear country, and we'd been careful with our food, hanging it in a tree away from camp each night. But these footsteps didn't sound like a bear. Bears kind of shuffle and snuffle around. These steps were purposeful, methodical, like someone walking very slowly, placing each foot with care. I lay there frozen in my sleeping bag, barely breathing, just listening. The footsteps circled our tent once, then moved toward where we had our cooler and supplies. I heard some rustling, then silence for maybe 5 minutes. Then the footsteps again, moving away from camp and into the trees. I stayed awake for at least 2 hours after that, straining to hear any sound. But whatever it was had gone. I didn't wake Jake. Figured there was no point in both of us losing sleep, and I wasn't even sure what I'd heard. When morning came, I almost convinced myself I'd dreamed the whole thing, but then we went to make breakfast. Our cooler had been moved, not knocked over or torn apart like a bear would do, just moved about 15 feet from where we'd left it. And when we opened it, some of our food was missing. A package of bacon, some beef jerky, and a block of cheese were gone. The weird thing was, there were no claw marks, no torn packaging scattered around. It was like someone had opened the cooler, carefully selected what they wanted and closed it again. Raccoons, Jake suggested, but we both knew better. Raccoons make a mess. They don't neatly close coolers when they're done. Maybe another camper came by in the night, I said, not believing it myself. We hadn't seen another soul since arriving, and we were miles from anywhere someone might reasonably hike from. We spent that day fishing again, but the easy camaraderie of the previous days was gone. We were both on edge, constantly scanning the tree line, jumping at every snapping twig. We didn't talk much about what had happened, but we made sure to secure everything better that night. We put the cooler in the vestibule of our tent and rigged up some empty cans on fishing line around the perimeter of our camp. An old trick Jake's dad had taught him for bear country. That night, we went to bed early, both of us exhausted from the poor sleep the night before. I don't know how long I slept before it happened again. This time, it was around midnight, and the sound that woke me was unmistakable. A deep, rumbling grunt, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Not a bear, not a moose, not anything I could identify. It was followed by heavy movement outside the tent. Jake was awake too this time. I could tell by his breathing. We lay there, completely still, listening to whatever was out there moving around our camp. Our alarm system of cans never made a sound, which meant whatever it was had either avoided them or carefully navigated around them. "What the hell is that?" Jake whispered, so quietly I barely heard him. I shook my head, then realized he couldn't see me in the dark. "Don't know," I whispered back, "but I'm gonna look." Jake grabbed my arm. "Are you crazy?" Maybe I was, but not knowing was worse than seeing. I slowly unzipped my sleeping bag, then crawled to the tent flap. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. With shaking hands, I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The moon was almost full that night, casting everything in a silvery glow. At first, I didn't see anything. Then movement caught my eye at the edge of our camp, near the tree line. I adjusted my position to see better, and that's when I saw it. Standing there, partially illuminated by moonlight, was a massive figure. It was covered in dark hair, not fur but hair, and stood upright on two legs. Even from 30 feet away, I could tell it was huge, at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. Its arms hung unnaturally long, past its waist. Its chest was broad and powerful, but it was the face that made my blood run cold. In the moonlight, I could make out a face that was almost human, but not quite. The brow was heavy, the jaw prominent, and it was looking directly at me. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, we stared at each other. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I felt like a rabbit caught in headlights. Those eyes, I'll never forget them. Dark, intelligent, and completely aware. This wasn't an animal acting on instinct. Whatever this thing was, it was thinking, assessing. Then, without making a sound, it turned and walked into the trees, not running, not crashing through the undergrowth like a startled animal, just calmly walking away, disappearing into the shadows between the pines. I zipped the tent closed and collapsed back onto my sleeping bag, my entire body trembling. "What?" Jake demanded. "What did you see?" I couldn't find the words at first. How do you describe something you've never seen before? Something that shouldn't exist? "I don't know," I finally managed. It was big, walking on two legs, hairy. It wasn't a bear, Jake. It wasn't anything I've ever seen before. Jake reached for his flashlight. "We need to see what's out there." I wanted to tell him no, to stay in the tent until daylight, but curiosity and adrenaline overrode my fear. We both put on our boots, grabbed our flashlights and Jake's hunting knife, the only weapon we had, and cautiously stepped outside. The night was eerily quiet. No crickets chirping, no owls hooting, just silence. We swept our flashlight beams around the campsite, finding nothing disturbed. Then Jake's light caught something on the ground. "Holy shit," he breathed. There, pressed deep into the soft earth, was a footprint, but not just any footprint. This was massive, easily twice the size of my boot, and clearly not a bear's paw. It had 5 toes, a distinct heel, and an arch like a human foot. But the proportions were all wrong. We followed the tracks with our lights and found a clear trail leading away from our camp, into the forest, in the direction the creature had gone. Neither of us suggested following the tracks into the dark woods. We weren't that stupid. Instead, we built up our campfire again, sitting back to back so we could watch in all directions, and waited for dawn. When the first light finally broke over the mountains, we immediately started packing up. We didn't discuss it, we just knew we were leaving. As I was taking down the tent, Jake was securing our gear, both of us working with the efficiency of fear. That's when we heard it. A low, rumbling growl from the tree line. We both froze, looking toward the sound. I couldn't see anything in the dense undergrowth, but I knew it was there, watching us. The growl wasn't like a bear or a cougar. It was deeper, more resonant, and somehow deliberate, like a warning. We finished packing in record time, not bothering with breakfast or coffee. As we shouldered our packs and started the hike back to the truck, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on my back. Every few minutes I turned to look behind us, expecting to see that massive figure following, but the trail remained empty. The 4-mile hike out seemed 10 times longer than when we'd arrived. We barely spoke, just pushed ourselves to move as quickly as possible over the rough terrain. When we finally reached my truck, we threw our gear in the back and got the hell out of there, the tires spinning in mud as I accelerated down the logging road. Only when we hit the main highway did we finally start to relax enough to talk about what had happened. Jake thought it might have been a grizzly walking on its hind legs, but we both knew bears don't stand that way for extended periods. They certainly don't walk that way, and they don't have feet like what we'd seen. We debated reporting it to the local ranger station, but what would we say? That we saw Bigfoot? We'd be laughed out of the building. So we kept it to ourselves, making a pact to never tell anyone who wouldn't understand. I've never been back to Lake Stinson. Jake went a couple years later with some other friends. Said he wanted to face his fears, but I couldn't do it. The memory of those intelligent eyes staring at me in the moonlight, of that deliberate footstep pattern around our tent, of that warning growl as we were leaving, it's all still too vivid. Whatever we encountered that night, it wasn't a bear. It wasn't any known animal, and the way it behaved, moving our cooler, selecting food, watching us, made it clear this wasn't just some creature acting on instinct. It was intelligent, and it was letting us know we were in its territory. I still go camping and fishing all the time, but I stick to popular spots now, places with other people around. And whenever I'm in the woods and feel that prickle on the back of my neck like I'm being watched, I remember those eyes in the moonlight, and I wonder if it's watching me again. Story 10. I've spent 25 years working in forestry. I know these woods better than I know the back of my hand. Every trail, every ridge, the way the light filters through the canopy in different seasons. I've seen bears, cougars, all kinds of wildlife. But what I encountered last June has haunted me ever since, and I'm finally working up the courage to write about it. It was early June, about 6 months ago now. I had to survey a section in the national forest that was being considered for selective logging. Standard procedure. Check the health of the trees, mark boundaries, document any environmental concerns. I'd done it 1,000 times before. I got to the trailhead just after sunrise. The morning was cool with a thick fog hanging between the trees, which isn't unusual for that time of year in our area. The moisture clung to my beard and jacket as I gathered my gear, tablet with GPS, marking tape, water, lunch, and my usual tools. Nothing felt off at first, just another day in the field. I'd been walking for maybe 45 minutes, taking notes on my tablet about some beetle damage I'd spotted, when I heard it. 3 distinct knocks, like someone hitting a hollow log with another piece of wood. Knock, 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 then silence. I stopped. In all my years working these forests, I'd never heard anything quite like it. It wasn't a woodpecker, too slow, too deliberate. My first thought was, maybe it was another survey crew, but I knew I was the only one scheduled for this section today. I continued walking, but more alert now. The fog was still heavy, limiting visibility to maybe 50 or 60 feet in some spots. Then it happened again, 3 more knocks, but from a different direction, off to my right. It felt coordinated somehow, like signals. I'm not a jumpy person, you can't be in this line of work. But something about those knocks made the hair on my arms stand up. I called out, "Hello? Forest Service here." My voice sounded muffled in the fog. No response. Just the normal forest sounds resuming. Birds, the occasional rustle of small animals. I pushed forward, following my GPS coordinates to the next survey point. That's when the smell hit me. Anyone who's worked outdoors knows animal smells. The musk of a bear, the distinct odor of a skunk, even the smell of death when you come across a carcass. This was different. It was like wet dog fur mixed with something rotting, but more pungent, more wild. It was so strong it made my eyes water. I stopped again, scanning the trees around me. The fog had thinned slightly, giving me maybe 70 feet of visibility now. I remember checking my watch. It was 8:37 in the morning. That detail stuck with me because what happened next seemed to stretch time in a way I can't explain. About 50 yards ahead, through a gap in the trees, I saw movement. At first I thought it might be a bear standing on its hind legs, but as I focused, I realized this was something else entirely. A massive figure, covered in dark reddish-brown hair, was moving between the trees with a smooth gait that no bear could manage. It was walking upright, easily over 7 feet tall, with arms that hung lower than a human's would. My breath caught in my throat. I'd heard stories, of course. Everyone who works in remote forests has. But I'd always written them off as campfire tales or misidentified bears. What I was seeing didn't fit any explanation I could rationalize. The creature moved with an unnatural grace for something so big, stepping over fallen logs without breaking stride. It hadn't noticed me yet, or at least wasn't acknowledging me if it had. I don't know what possessed me, but I reached for my phone. Maybe I wanted proof, or maybe I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. But as I fumbled with my pocket, my keys jingled slightly. The sound was barely audible to me, but the creature's head snapped in my direction immediately. It turned fully toward me, and for the first time I could see its face clearly. It had deep-set eyes, dark and intelligent, under a pronounced brow ridge that reminded me of those old reconstructions of Neanderthals, but different. Its nose was wide and flat, nostrils flaring slightly as if it was scenting the air. The jaw was strong, protruding slightly, with lips pressed into a thin line, but it was the eyes that got me. They weren't animal eyes. There was something behind them, awareness, calculation. It was looking at me the way someone looks at an unexpected visitor who's wandered onto their property. We stood there just watching each other, 10 seconds that felt like an eternity. I couldn't move. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but some instinct told me running would be the worst thing I could do. Then it made a sound, a low growl that transformed into something like a grunt. It wasn't just something I heard. I felt it vibrate in my chest. It wasn't aggressive exactly, but there was no mistaking the warning in it. I started backing away slowly, keeping my eyes on it. Everything I'd ever learned about predator encounters told me not to turn my back. After I'd retreated about 20 feet still facing it, the creature gave what seemed like a slight nod. I swear to God, a nod, then turned and moved into the thick brush. For something so large, it disappeared with barely a sound. One moment it was there, the next, gone. I waited a minute, then two, straining to hear any sign of it. Nothing. No wood knocks, no movement, just the forest, quiet except for a distant woodpecker and the breeze through the trees. I made my way back to my truck as calmly as I could manage, though my legs felt like jelly. I kept expecting to hear it following me, but there was nothing. When I reached my vehicle, I sat inside with the doors locked for at least half an hour, just breathing, trying to process what I'd seen. I've gone back and forth 1,000 times about what happened that day. I've worked these forests for most of my adult life. I know a bear when I see one. I know what a man in a suit would look like. This wasn't either of those things. The way it moved was all wrong for a human, too fluid, too balanced for its size, and no bear has that kind of gait or posture. The face, I still see those eyes in my dreams sometimes. Thoughtful, evaluating, not hostile, but not friendly either. Over the month since it happened, I've told only a handful of people. My wife knows. She could tell something had shaken me up when I got home that day. I couldn't hide it from her. She believes me, which matters more than anything. My brother, who's hunted these woods all his life, believes me too. He said he's heard strange sounds over the years that he couldn't explain. Others have been less receptive. My supervisor gave me that look, you know the one, when I tried to bring it up casually, like I was pulling his leg or had been out in the sun too long. A buddy from the Forest Service just laughed and asked what I'd been drinking that morning. So I've mostly kept it to myself, until now. I guess I'm writing this because I need to tell it, need to put it down somewhere. And maybe, just maybe, someone else has seen what I saw. Here's what I keep coming back to. That thing knew exactly what it was doing. Those wood knocks weren't random. That was communication. It knew I was there long before I knew it was there. And when our eyes met, there was recognition. Not of me personally, but recognition of what I was, a human, an intruder maybe, and it chose to warn me rather than threaten me. That grunt growl wasn't an attack signal, it was saying, that's far enough. When I respected that boundary, it let me go. I've been back to those woods since then. My job requires it. I've never seen the creature again, but sometimes, when the fog is thick and the forest is quiet, I get that feeling of being watched, and occasionally from far off I'll hear 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I don't mention those knocks to anyone anymore. I just acknowledge them with a nod in that direction and continue my work. It feels like an understanding of sorts. I don't know what I encountered that foggy June morning. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, an undiscovered primate. The label doesn't really matter to me. What matters is that there's something out there in our forests that we don't understand, something intelligent that's managed to stay hidden despite all our technology and expansion. And sometimes, when the conditions are just right, our paths cross. I consider myself lucky. Not everyone who has these encounters walks away with just a story to tell. I think it let me leave because I showed respect. I didn't run, I didn't threaten. I backed away when warned. That's the thing that stays with me most. Not the fear, though there was plenty of that. It's the sense that I was given a glimpse of something ancient, something that has rules and boundaries that we've forgotten or never knew. And when I acknowledged those boundaries, I was allowed to return to my world unharmed. I still do my surveys. I still mark trees and document forest health. But I do it differently now. More aware, more respectful of the spaces I move through, and sometimes, just sometimes, I leave a small offering, an apple or handful of berries, at the base of an old-growth tree. Not because I expect anything in return, but as an acknowledgement, these woods aren't just ours, they never were. Story 11. I've been carrying this memory for so long, it feels strange to finally write it down. It happened back in 1909, but sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, It feels like it was yesterday. I was just a schoolboy then, living north of Bega in New South Wales. It was a simpler time. No phones, no internet, just us kids finding ways to entertain ourselves in the Australian bush. That summer was particularly hot, even by our standards. School had let out early that day. I think our teacher, Mrs. Wilson, was feeling the heat as much as we were. My mates, Tommy Fletcher, Billy Cooper, and the Harris twins. And I decided to head to our favorite swimming hole. It was about a 20-minute walk from town, secluded enough that we felt like it was our own private paradise. The water hole was nestled in this little valley, surrounded by thick scrub and these massive eucalyptus trees that provided patches of shade. The water was always cool, fed by a small creek that came down from the hills. We'd been going there for years, knew every rock and shallow spot. I remember my dad warning us about swimming alone, typical parent stuff about drowning or snakes. But never once did he mention, well, what we encountered that day. We got there around midday. The sun was beating down something fierce, and we couldn't wait to get in the water. We dropped our things by this big flat rock we always used, perfect for jumping off, and stripped down to our underclothes. Tommy was the first one in, doing his usual cannonball and splashing water everywhere. Billy followed with what he called his champion dive, though it was more of a belly flop, if I'm being honest. For about an hour, we just swam and mucked around like we always did. We had this game where we tried to dunk each other, and I remember I just managed to get both Harris twins at once, a rare accomplishment I was pretty chuffed about. We were laughing and carrying on, not really paying attention to anything else. I'm not sure who noticed it first. Might have been me, might have been Billy, but gradually we all became aware that the usual bush sounds had stopped. You know how the Australian bush is normally alive with noise? Birds calling, insects buzzing, the occasional rustle in the undergrowth. But suddenly there was this stillness, like everything was holding its breath. "You guys hear that?" Tommy asked, water dripping from his hair as he treaded water. "Hear what?" one of the twins replied. "Nothing. That's what's weird. It's too quiet." We all stopped splashing around and listened. He was right. The only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the banks of the waterhole. Even the cicadas had stopped their endless droning. It was as if someone had closed a door on all the noise. I felt the first tingle of unease run down my spine. I'd grown up in the bush. I knew what it meant when everything went quiet. It meant something was out there, something that made all the normal creatures shut up and hide. "Probably just a goanna or something," Billy said. But his voice had that forced, casual tone that told me he was trying to convince himself as much as us. We started swimming again, but the fun had gone out of it. We were all on edge, glancing at the scrub surrounding the waterhole. The trees and dense undergrowth suddenly seemed menacing rather than familiar. That's when we heard it. This roar. I've spent years trying to find the right words to describe that sound, and I still can't do it justice. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard before or since. Not like a dingo or a wild dog. Not like a bull or any farm animal. It was deep and powerful and angry. It echoed around the little valley, bouncing off the water, seeming to come from everywhere at once. We all froze. I remember looking at Tommy, his face gone white as a sheet, his eyes wide with fear. "What the bloody hell was that?" he whispered. Before any of us could answer, there was another roar, closer this time, and now we could tell which direction it was coming from. About 30 yards away, on the far side of the waterhole, the scrub was thick and dark. That's when we saw the movement. At first, it was just the vegetation shaking, branches being pushed aside. I thought maybe it was a kangaroo. A big red sometimes came through that way, but then, God, even now my hands are shaking as I type this. A massive, dark shape emerged partially from the scrub. Not all the way, just enough that we could see it was there, watching us. It was big, much bigger than a man, covered in thick black hair. In the dappled light, coming through the trees, I could make out powerful arms that were tearing at the branches and undergrowth, ripping them back with frightening ease. Its face, I only caught glimpses, but what I saw has haunted me for decades. Dark eyes, deep set in a face that was both familiar and alien. It reminded me of pictures I'd seen in a book about orangutans, but this was no orangutan. It was something else entirely, something that didn't belong in the Australian bush, or anywhere else I knew of. It let out another roar, and this time I could see its mouth open, revealing teeth that gleamed in the sunlight. The sound hit me physically, like a punch to the chest. I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could do was stare at this impossible creature as it continued to tear at the vegetation, as if it was trying to clear a path to the water, to us. Billy was the first to break the spell. "Get out!" he screamed, already splashing toward the bank where we'd left our clothes. His voice jolted the rest of us into action. I've never swum so fast in my life. My arms and legs moved with a desperate energy born of pure terror. Behind us, the roaring continued, punctuated by the sound of breaking branches and the creature's heavy movements. We scrambled onto the bank, slipping on the mud, grabbing at our clothes without bothering to dry off. I remember struggling to get my shirt on over my wet skin, the fabric sticking and twisting. Tommy was hopping on one foot, trying to get his trousers on. One of the Harris twins had put his shirt on backward. The whole time, the creature kept roaring and thrashing in the scrub. It seemed to be getting more agitated, the sounds more frenzied. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw it had moved closer to the edge of the waterhole. In the clearer view, I could see just how massive it was, easily 7 feet tall, with shoulders twice the width of a grown man's. "Leave the rest," Tommy yelled, already turning to run with one boot in his hand and the other nowhere to be seen. "Just go." We didn't need to be told twice. We ran, half-dressed, carrying what belongings we'd managed to grab. I left behind a nearly new pocket knife my grandfather had given me for my birthday, but there was no way I was going back for it. The path back to town seemed 100 times longer than it had on the way there. We ran until our lungs burned, the sound of our own labored breathing and pounding footsteps drowning out any noises from behind. I kept expecting to hear that terrible roar again, kept imagining I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck, powerful hands about to grab me. We didn't stop until we reached the edge of town. We collapsed on the grass by Old Man Jenkins' paddock, gasping for air, our legs like jelly. For a long minute, none of us could speak. We just stared at each other, wide-eyed and trembling. What was that thing? One of the twins finally managed to ask between heaving breaths. Nobody had an answer. We'd all seen it, but none of us could make sense of what we'd seen. "We need to tell someone," I said at last. "My dad, the constable, someone." We nodded in agreement, and once we'd caught our breath, made our way to my house. It was closest, and my dad was respected in town, a former bushman who knew the area better than anyone. I'll never forget the look on my parents' faces as we burst into the kitchen, still damp, half-dressed, and babbling about a monster at the waterhole. My mother immediately thought we'd been up to mischief and were making up stories, but my father saw the genuine fear in our eyes. He sat us down, gave us water, and made us tell the story one at a time. His expression grew more serious with each telling. When we'd finished, he put on his hat and coat. "I'm going to get Constable Murray and a few of the men," he said. "You boys stay here with your mother, George." They returned several hours later. My father, Constable Murray, and 4 other men had gone to the waterhole with rifles. They'd searched the area thoroughly but found no sign of the creature itself. No footprints they could identify, no droppings, nothing that would prove what kind of animal had been there. But they did find evidence that something had been in that scrub. Branches were broken and torn, not cut, snapped by something strong. The undergrowth was trampled and pushed aside in a way that, according to my father, no kangaroo or known bush animal would do. "Could have been wild pigs," Constable Murray suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. "They can do a lot of damage to vegetation." My father just shook his head. I've hunted wild pig all my life. This wasn't that. They brought back our abandoned belongings, including my pocket knife, which I couldn't bring myself to carry again. It felt tainted somehow. The adults talked in low voices for a while, then told us not to go back to that waterhole. Not that any of us needed telling. I don't think any of us went swimming at all for the rest of that summer. In the days that followed, there were searches organized. Men with dogs and guns combed the bush for miles around. They found nothing, no tracks, no lair, no further signs of the creature. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. Gradually, people started to suggest that we boys had let our imaginations run away with us, that we'd seen a shadow, heard a strange echo, and scared ourselves silly, or that we'd made it all up for attention. Only my father seemed to truly believe us, and even he eventually stopped mentioning it. But I know what I saw. We all did. Sometimes in the years after, one of us would catch another's eye across the schoolyard or the street, and I could tell they were thinking about it too. We shared a silent understanding, a knowledge of something that existed beyond the safe, explainable world the adults wanted us to believe in. I'm an old man now. All my childhood friends are long gone. Tommy died in the First World War. The Harris twins moved away after finishing school, and Billy passed from pneumonia in his 30s. I'm the last one left who remembers that day at the waterhole. Sometimes I wonder if that creature is still out there, deep in the Australian bush. If it's watching swimmers from the shadows of other waterholes. If it's roaring in the night, a sound mistaken for wind or thunder by those who've never heard the real thing. I've never gone back to that spot, never even been tempted. Some memories are better left undisturbed, some places better left unvisited. But I know what I saw that day in 1909, and whatever it wasn't something that belonged in any book of Australian wildlife I've ever seen. The strangest part, over the years, I've heard whispers, other stories. A logger who quit his job after seeing something watching him from the trees. A family who moved away from their remote property after finding massive, unexplainable footprints in their yard. Campers who packed up in the middle of the night after hearing roars that didn't sound like any animal they knew. None of these people knew each other. None of them knew about my experience, but their descriptions, the size, the black hair, the roaring, the strength, they all match what we saw that day. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I'm just an old man with an old story. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, when I wake in the night to the sound of the wind in the trees outside my window, for just a moment it sounds like that roar from long ago, and I lie there, heart pounding, wondering if it's found me at last. Story 12. I was 8 years old then. Our house was pretty isolated, at the end of this short gravel road surrounded by thick forest, swamps and rocky hills. Mum and I had this little routine we'd do after rainstorms. We'd go for a drive on the gravel roads around our property to spot deer. I used to get so excited about those drives. Dad would usually stay home. He wasn't much for wildlife watching, so it was our special thing. That night, it was around 10 o'clock. The rain had just stopped, and everything was glistening in the headlights. Mom let me sit in the front seat, which was a big deal back then. I remember wearing my favorite blue raincoat even though the rain had stopped, and I had my little flashlight that I'd shine out the window, hoping to catch the reflection of deer eyes. We'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes, just chatting and looking for animals, when Mum decided to turn down this narrow road near the swampy area about 2 miles from our house. It was a road we didn't take very often because it got really muddy. But the rain hadn't been too heavy that night, so Mum thought it would be okay. We made it about half a mile down when we saw that a tree had fallen across the road. It wasn't huge, but big enough that we couldn't drive over it or around it. The road was too narrow with thick brush on both sides. "Looks like we'll have to turn around," Mom said. I remember being disappointed because I hadn't seen any deer yet. Mom started to back up to find a spot wide enough to turn around in. That's when our headlights swept across the broken tree stump on the side of the road, and that's when I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. Standing next to the stump was something massive. It was just standing there, not moving, staring at us. "Mom," I whispered. I couldn't even get the words out, but she had already seen it too because she'd gone completely stiff next to me. The headlights were shining right on it. It was tall, taller than my dad, and he was 6 feet, maybe 6.5 or 7 feet. It's hard to judge when you're 8, but I know it was big, really big. The thing that stands out most in my memory was its hair. It wasn't dark like you'd expect from the stories. It was a light color, almost white or a really pale gray. The hair was long on its arms and hanging down from its chest, not matted like a dirty animal, but not neat either, just hanging, dripping a little from the rain. Its body was massive, wide shoulders, way wider than a normal person. The arms were long and thick, not like human arms at all. They hung down almost to its knees. The chest was broad and powerful looking. The face, I still have trouble describing the face because the headlights were making shadows. And honestly, I think my brain was shutting down from fear. But I remember that its head seemed to sit directly on its shoulders. Like there wasn't really a neck, just this broad head on these massive shoulders. I couldn't clearly see its eyes, but I knew it was looking at us. There was this feeling of being watched, being studied. It didn't make any movements toward us. It just stood there, perfectly still, like it was as surprised to see us as we were to see it. Mom snapped out of it first. She threw the car into reverse and hit the gas hard. The tires spun in the mud for a second before catching, and we shot backward. I remember the scraping sound as branches and bushes scraped against the sides of the car. Mom wasn't even trying to stay centered on the road. She was just focused on getting us out of there as fast as possible. Neither of us said a word. I was pressed back against the seat, too scared to even look out the window in case it was following us. The only sound was our breathing and the engine revving as Mom pushed our old Toyota to its limits on that rough gravel road. When we got back to the main road, Mom pulled over and just sat there gripping the steering wheel. Her knuckles were white. I remember that clearly, how white her knuckles were. "Mia," she finally said, her voice shaking, "what did we just see?" I couldn't answer. I was trembling so hard my teeth were chattering, even though it was summer and not cold at all. "It wasn't a bear," she said almost to herself. "It wasn't standing like a bear." I found my voice finally. "It was standing like a person, Mom." She nodded, and I saw her swallow hard. But it wasn't a person. We sat there for maybe 5 minutes, just trying to calm down. Then Mom turned to me and said something that seems strange now, but at the time made perfect sense. "Let's not tell Dad about this, okay? He'll just worry and won't let us go driving at night anymore." I agreed immediately. Dad was protective and would definitely put an end to our nighttime drives. Plus, I wasn't sure I could even explain what we'd seen. I didn't have the words for it. We drove home in silence. When we got back, Dad was watching TV and barely looked up when we came in. Mom said something about not seeing many animals and headed straight for the kitchen where she poured herself a glass of wine. I went to my room and lay in bed with all the lights on until I finally fell asleep. For weeks afterward, I had nightmares. I'd wake up convinced that the creature was standing outside my window, looking in with those eyes I couldn't quite remember. Mom never brought it up, and neither did I, but I noticed we stopped doing our nighttime drives. If we did go out, we stayed on the main roads, and we were always home before dark. School started again in the fall, and gradually the memory became less immediate, though it never went away. Sometimes Mum and I would exchange a look if something on TV mentioned Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but we never discussed it directly. It was our secret, this impossible thing we'd seen that didn't fit into the world as we understood it. As I got older, I started researching. I'd go to the library and check out books on cryptids and unexplained phenomena. I'd read accounts of Sasquatch sightings, comparing them to what we'd seen. Some details matched: the height, the broad shoulders, the way it stood upright. But other details differed. Most accounts described creatures with dark hair, not the pale, almost white hair we'd seen. I learned that Algonquin Park and the surrounding areas had a history of strange sightings. Indigenous legends spoke of wild men in the forests. Trappers and hunters had stories of strange encounters. It helped me feel less crazy, knowing that others had seen things they couldn't explain. I never told my friends. As a teenager, I was already struggling to fit in. The last thing I needed was to be known as the crazy Bigfoot girl. So I kept it to myself, this formative experience that I couldn't share. My mum and I still never really talked about it, but after I turned 16 and got my driver's license, she gave me a disposable camera to keep in my car. "Just in case you ever see something worth photographing," she said. We both knew what she meant. Now I'm in my 30s, and I still live in Ontario, though not in the same house. I've never lost my connection to the woods. I hunt, I fish, I hike. Some friends think it's strange that someone who spends so much time outdoors always insists on being home before dark, but old habits die hard. I've set up trail cameras on my property and in areas I frequent. Officially, I tell people I'm tracking deer movements or trying to photograph wolves. The truth is, I'm still looking for evidence of what Mom and I saw that night. My cameras have captured plenty of wildlife: deer, moose, black bears, even a cougar once, which was rare for the area, but never anything unexplainable, never anything that matched what we saw by that fallen tree. Last hunting season, something strange happened. I was at a local diner that hunters frequent during deer season, and I got talking with this older guy, Frank. He'd been hunting the area for decades and had that weathered look of someone who spends most of his time outdoors. After a few cups of coffee, the conversation turned to strange things people had seen in the woods. Most hunters have stories: weird lights, sounds they couldn't identify, animals behaving oddly. Frank was quiet while others talked, but I noticed him watching me. Later, as the group was breaking up, he pulled me aside. "You've seen something, haven't you?" he asked quietly. I started to deny it automatically, but something in his expression stopped me. "Maybe," I admitted. "When I was a kid." He nodded and pulled out his phone. 3 years ago, about 15 miles north of Algonquin," he said, showing me a photo. It was blurry, taken at a distance with what was probably just a regular cell phone camera. But it showed something large and pale in the forest, partially hidden behind trees. My stomach dropped. The coloring was similar to what Mom and I had seen, that same pale, almost white appearance that had always made me doubt our experience, since it didn't match the typical Sasquatch descriptions. "What do you think it is?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Frank shrugged. "Don't know. Saw it at dawn while I was in my tree stand. By the time I got my phone out, it was moving away. Too big for a bear, especially standing like that. Too pale for a moose. Moved like nothing I've ever seen. And I've been in these woods for 40 years. I wanted to tell him then, to share my story, but I found I couldn't. After keeping it inside for so long, the words wouldn't come out. I just nodded and thanked him for showing me. That was 6 months ago. I've increased my trail camera network since then, focusing on areas with swampy terrain, similar to where we had our encounter. Still nothing conclusive, but I'm not giving up. Mom's in her 60s now. Her health isn't great. Arthritis has taken a toll, and she doesn't get out much. When I visit, we still don't talk about that night, but sometimes when I'm leaving, she'll say, "Keep your eyes open out there." And I know exactly what she means. We both know what we saw. It wasn't a bear standing awkwardly. It wasn't a man in a costume in the middle of nowhere on a rainy night. It wasn't a moose or any other animal native to these forests. It was something tall and upright that moved like a person but wasn't a person. Something with pale, hanging hair and a body too powerful and proportioned too strangely to be human. Something that watched us with an intelligence I could feel even if I couldn't clearly see its eyes. I don't know if I'll ever find proof or see another one, but I know that night changed how I see the world, opened up possibilities that most people never have to consider. There are things in the woods that science hasn't categorized, that exist in the spaces between what we know and what we don't. And sometimes on rainy nights when the smell of wet earth fills the air, I find myself looking out windows, scanning the tree line, remembering the feeling of being watched by something that shouldn't exist. And I wonder if somewhere out there it remembers the night it saw us too. Story 13. I never thought I'd be sharing this story with strangers, but I need to tell someone who might actually believe me. My husband James thinks I'm obsessing, but I can't shake what's been happening around our property these past few weeks. We live in Sawtee, Georgia, about 20 minutes from Helen, in a pretty rural area. Our house sits at the edge of some dense woods that stretch for miles. We've been here nearly 7 years, and I've always loved how peaceful it is, at least until 3 weeks ago. It started on a Tuesday night. I remember because James had stayed up late watching that baseball game between Atlanta and Philadelphia. He's always been a night owl anyway, especially during hunting season when he's constantly checking trail cams and planning his next trip out. I was already in bed when he came in, weirdly quiet, and asked if I'd heard anything outside. "No, why?" I mumbled, half asleep. "Probably nothing," he said. "Just some weird noise in the woods." I didn't think much of it until the next night when he mentioned it again. This time I was more awake and noticed he seemed genuinely confused, which isn't like James at all. He spent his whole life outdoors and can identify practically every animal sound in these woods. When something stumps him, it gets my attention. "I can't figure out what it is," he told me while sitting at the kitchen table cleaning his hunting knife. "It's not quite a howl, not quite a scream, and it moves too damn fast." I just nodded along, figuring it was probably some coyote or maybe even someone's exotic pet that got loose. That happens around here more than you'd think. Last year, someone's pet python was found half a mile from our place. People are stupid sometimes. By the end of that first week, James had started staying up specifically to listen for it. He'd sit on our back porch with just the red light on, so as not to scare away wildlife, he always says, smoking cigarettes and waiting. I was still sleeping through it all until Friday night, when he actually woke me up around 1 in the morning. "Martha, you gotta hear this," he whispered, shaking my shoulder. "It's back, and it's closer." I was annoyed at first, but the look on his face, I can't really describe it. Not scared exactly, but intense, alert, like he gets when he's tracking something while hunting. I threw on my robe and followed him to the back porch. The night was cool for September, maybe in the low 60s. There was just a sliver of moon, and the woods behind our house were almost completely dark. We sat in silence for maybe 10 minutes before James suddenly straightened up in his chair. "Listen," he whispered. At first, I didn't hear anything except the usual cricket chorus and the occasional rustle of leaves. Then it came. This sound I still struggle to describe properly. It started as something like a deep moan that rapidly shifted into a high-pitched, not quite a scream, not quite a howl. It lasted maybe 8 seconds, and it made the hair on my arm stand straight up. "What the hell is that?" I whispered, grabbing James's arm. "I don't know," he said, and that scared me more than the sound itself. James knows every animal in these woods, but listen to what happens next. About 30 seconds after the sound faded, I heard a dog start barking. Sounded like the miller's German shepherd from 2 properties over. Then another dog joined in, the Pattersons' hunting dogs, then another from further away. It was like a chain reaction, moving in the same direction the sound had traveled. "It's been doing that every night," James said. "The sound moves through the woods behind us, crosses Old Mill Road, and heads toward the ravine, and all the dogs follow it with their barking like they're tracking it." "Could it be a bear?" I suggested. Though I knew it wasn't, I've heard bears plenty of times. James shook his head. Bears don't move that fast, and they don't make sounds like that. Neither do bobcats or coyotes or anything else I've ever heard around here. We sat out there for another hour, but it didn't make another sound. When we finally went back to bed, I couldn't sleep. Something about that noise felt wrong, unnatural, like it didn't belong in these woods. For the next few nights, we'd hear it once or twice each night, always between midnight and 3 in the morning, always followed by that wave of dog barking tracking its movement. James started keeping a notebook, marking down the time and the direction. He even tried to record it on his phone, but the quality was terrible, just a faint wail buried under static and cricket noise. About a week and a half in, we were sitting on the porch around 1:30 in the morning when James suddenly tensed up. "Look," he whispered, pointing toward the tree line. I squinted into the darkness. Our property has about 50 yards of cleared land before the woods start. And there, right at the edge, I saw movement. Something tall shifted between 2 pine trees. In the darkness, I couldn't make out details, just a black shape darker than the surrounding shadows. It seemed to be standing upright. "Is that a person?" I whispered, my heart suddenly pounding. James didn't answer. He slowly reached for the flashlight beside his chair, but before he could turn it on, the shape moved. Fast, way too fast for a person. It covered at least 30 feet in what seemed like a single bound, disappearing deeper into the trees. Seconds later, we heard that same awful howl scream, but much louder this time, like it was announcing itself. The dogs in the neighborhood went absolutely crazy, not just barking now, but frantic, panicked barking mixed with whines. I could hear the miller's dog actually straining against its chain, the metal links clanking. "Jesus Christ," James muttered. He stood up suddenly. "I'm getting my rifle." I grabbed his arm. "Don't you dare go into those woods," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice was, despite my racing heart. "Whatever that is, it's not worth chasing in the dark." For once, he didn't argue. We went inside and locked all the doors and windows. I know it sounds ridiculous, we've never locked our doors out here, but something about what we'd seen felt threatening in a way I can't really explain. The next morning, James went to examine the tree line where we'd seen the figure. He found broken branches about 8 feet up, way higher than a deer or normal wildlife would cause, and some weird impressions in the ground that had already been mostly washed away by the morning dew. Not clear footprints, just disturbed earth. It was around this time that I started doing some research online. At first, I was looking up local wildlife, thinking maybe there was some explanation, some animal native to the area that we somehow hadn't encountered in our 7 years here, but nothing matched. Then, feeling a little embarrassed, I started looking up accounts of strange creatures in North Georgia, and that's when I found stories, dozens of them, from people in counties all around us, describing almost exactly what we were experiencing. The strange howl scream, the rapid movement through wooded areas, the way dogs would track it with their barking. Some people even described seeing tall, dark figures at the edges of their property. Most of the accounts called it Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but some had different names. The Georgia Howler or Night Screamer. When I showed James, he laughed it off at first, saying people would blame anything strange on Bigfoot, but I could tell the similarities to our experience had gotten to him. "I'm not saying it's Bigfoot," he said that night as we sat on the porch waiting. "But something's out there that doesn't belong. 2 nights ago was when things escalated. The sounds had been getting closer to our house each night, and the dogs in the neighborhood seemed more agitated, barking even before the creature made any noise, like they could sense it coming." We were on the porch around 2 in the morning. James had his rifle leaning against his chair, despite my objections. It had been quiet for about an hour, when suddenly all the neighborhood dogs fell silent at once. Not gradually, but all at the exact same moment. The crickets stopped too. The woods became so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. "Something's wrong," James whispered, reaching for his rifle. Then we heard it. Not from the woods this time, but from our backyard. That same howl scream, but so close it felt like it vibrated through my chest. I froze, unable to move or speak. James stood up slowly, raising his rifle, and there it was, standing in our yard about 30 yards from the porch. In the dim red light, I could only see its outline, tall, at least 7 feet, with broad shoulders and long arms that hung down past what would be its knees. It was covered in something dark that could have been fur, but in that light, I couldn't be sure. Its face was just a black void. It stood there, completely still, for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Then it made a different sound, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from deep in its chest. The sound wasn't threatening exactly, more like curious, like it was studying us the same way we were studying it. James raised his rifle, and I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I whispered. "Please don't." The creature tilted its head slightly, like it was trying to understand what we were saying. Then, in one fluid motion, it turned and sprinted toward the woods, moving so fast it was just a blur of darkness. It covered the 50 yards to the tree line in seconds, making hardly any noise despite its size. As soon as it disappeared into the trees, the neighborhood dogs started barking again, tracking its movement away from our property. James and I sat there in stunned silence for a long time before finally going inside. Yesterday, we didn't talk much about what we'd seen. James spent the day setting up game cameras around our property, pointing toward the woods. I called our nearest neighbors, the Hendersons, to ask if they'd heard or seen anything strange lately, but they said no. They're older and go to bed early, so they've probably been asleep when all this has been happening. Last night we waited again, but nothing came. The woods were normal, crickets chirping, occasional rustling from small animals, distant hoots from owls, the normal sounds that used to comfort me but now just make me tense, waiting for them to suddenly stop. This morning, James checked the game cameras. Most showed nothing, but one, the one pointing directly at the spot where we saw the figure standing, had been torn from the tree and smashed. The memory card was missing. So that's where we are now. Tonight will be the 22nd night since this all started. James thinks we should call someone, the Department of Natural Resources maybe, or even those Bigfoot research groups. I'm not sure what to do. Part of me wants to know what this thing is, but another part of me is terrified of finding out. I keep thinking about how it just stood there, watching us, not attacking, not even threatening, just observing, like it was trying to figure us out. Tonight, I'm going to record everything on my phone and keep it with me. If anything happens, at least I'll have evidence. James has loaded his rifle with rubber bullets, enough to scare it off without killing it, he says. I don't know if that would even work. I've never believed in things like Bigfoot or monsters in the woods. I've always thought people who claimed to see such things were either lying or confused. But now I don't know what to think. All I know is that something is out there in the woods behind our house, something that doesn't move like any animal I've ever seen, something that watches us from the darkness, and I can't shake the feeling that it's getting more curious about us every night. Story 14. I still can't believe what happened that night in the Cascades. It's been 21 years, and I've never shared this publicly until now. My friend Derek and I experienced something that completely changed how I view the wilderness. I've hiked hundreds of trails since then, but never again after dark on that particular path near Mount Jefferson. It was late September 2002. Derek and I were both working at this restaurant in Salem with crazy hours. But we were determined to get some hiking in before the weather turned. We'd planned this overnight trip for weeks. Hike in 3 miles Thursday night camp, then push deeper into the backcountry Friday morning. We'd done night hikes before, so it didn't seem like a big deal. We didn't get to the trailhead until almost 8:30 that night. The sun had already set, but we had good headlamps, proper gear, and the weather forecast was clear. I remember checking my watch as we locked the car and shouldered our packs. 8:27 p.m. Derek joked that we'd still have the whole forest to ourselves, which usually would have been a good thing. The first thing that struck me when we stepped onto the trail was the silence. I've spent countless nights in forests, and they're never completely quiet. There's always something, wind in the trees, small animals rustling, distant owl calls. But that night, nothing. It was so still that our footsteps seemed unnaturally loud on the pine needle-covered path. Even Derek noticed it right away. "Man, it's dead quiet out here," he said, his voice sounding strange in the stillness. "Yeah, weird," I replied, feeling a slight unease I couldn't explain. "Maybe a storm's coming or something." We pushed on anyway, following our headlamp beams through the trees. The trail was well maintained but narrow, winding through thick stands of Douglas fir and hemlock. About 45 minutes in, we were making good time despite the darkness. Around 10 o'clock we came to a section where the main trail curved around a stand of older trees. We knew from previous hikes that there was a small clearing just beyond, which would make a decent camping spot. As we approached the bend, both our headlamps caught something that made my blood run cold. Two eyes, reflecting red in our light, staring directly at us from behind a fallen log about 30 yards ahead. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe an elk. But then the eyes moved. They rose upward from maybe 4 feet off the ground to nearly 8 feet high. As whatever they belonged to stood up, I felt my mouth go dry. "What the hell is that?" Derek whispered, his voice tight. I pulled out my larger flashlight, one of those heavy maglights, and pointed it toward the spot. The beam caught something large and broad, a shadowy figure partially hidden behind brush. It was massive with wide shoulders, but the details were obscured by the foliage. Whatever it was remained perfectly still, just watching us. "I think we should back up," I said quietly, already taking a step backward. Derek nodded, and we slowly retreated, keeping our lights on the spot where we'd seen the eyes. We backed up maybe 20 yards, then turned to continue along the trail, walking faster now. That's when we heard it. Movement in the forest, parallel to the trail. Something large moving through the underbrush alongside us, matching our pace. It wasn't crashing through, that's what was so unnerving. It moved with purpose, deliberate steps, stopping when we stopped. I've tracked deer and elk. This moved nothing like them. "Do you hear that?" Derek asked, his voice barely audible. "Yeah, keep walking." A quarter mile later, I spotted another flash of red eyes to our right, blinking in and out as they moved behind trees. Still no sounds from the creature itself. No growls, no calls, nothing but quiet tracking and slow, heavy movement. I've encountered bears, cougars, and all sorts of wildlife on trails, but nothing had ever behaved like this. "Let's pick up the pace," I said, not wanting to run and trigger some kind of predatory response, but desperately wanting to put distance between us and whatever was following. We moved faster, both scanning the woods with our lights. The trees seemed to close in around us, shadows shifting and playing tricks on our eyes, but those red eyes were no trick. I kept catching glimpses, always just at the edge of our light beams, always moving parallel to us. We'd hiked about 1.5 miles by this point, which meant we still had another 1.5 miles to get back to the trailhead. My mind was racing, trying to catalog what animal this could possibly be. Bear, too tall. Cougar, wrong eye shine. Elk. They don't track humans like this. With about a 1/2 mile left to the trailhead, we heard loud branch snaps directly behind us. Not beside us anymore. Behind us. Then heavy footsteps crossing the trail just out of sight. Thump, thump, thump. Deliberate, powerful. I swung my flashlight around and there it was again. Red eye shine about 20 feet behind us, peering from behind a thick tree trunk, just one eye visible, as if it was looking at us with its head partially hidden. "Jesus," Derek whispered. "What the fuck is that thing?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had closed up with fear. We walked faster now, almost jogging but still not running. I was terrified that if we ran, it would chase us. The creature followed constantly, crunching leaves, breaking small branches, heavy footfalls on the soft forest floor. Always just off the trail, always just out of clear sight. I remember checking my watch obsessively. 10:47 p.m., 10:52, 10:59. Each minute crawled by as we pushed toward the trailhead. The strange stalking continued until finally we could see the clearing ahead where we'd parked. As we stepped from the forest into the open area of the parking lot, the sounds suddenly stopped. Just stopped. Like whatever it was had reached some invisible boundary it wouldn't cross. We both spun around, our lights sweeping the tree line. Nothing, but I swear I could feel it watching us from just inside the forest edge. We practically threw our packs into the car and got the hell out of there. For the first few miles driving away, we didn't even speak. Finally, Derek broke the silence. "That was a Sasquatch, wasn't it?" he asked, his voice shaky but certain. I'd been trying to convince myself it was something else, anything else. But the height, the width of that silhouette, those eyes and the way it moved, tracking us through difficult terrain without ever fully revealing itself. No known animal behaves that way. "I think so," I admitted. "It was too big to be anything else, and too smart." What stayed with me all these years isn't just the fear, but the sense of purpose behind its actions. It never tried to hurt us. It could have easily caught up to us or cut us off at any point. Instead, it seemed intent on making its presence known and escorting us out of its territory, like it was sending a message. I've replayed that night in my mind thousands of times. The absolute silence of the forest when we arrived, as if all other wildlife had cleared out. The deliberate way it revealed itself to us with those red reflecting eyes, the methodical tracking. It was communicating something. Derek and I have gone hiking many times since then, but never again at night on that trail. We've told a few close friends over the years, but most just laugh it off or tell us it must have been a bear. But I know what bears sound like when they move. I know what bears look like in the dark. This was something else entirely, something that knew exactly what it was doing, something intelligent enough to track us without fully revealing itself, yet purposeful enough to make sure we knew it was there. I still hike those mountains, but always with a deeper respect for what might be watching from just beyond the tree line, and I never, ever go back to that specific trail after dark. Some territories aren't meant for us, especially not when the sun goes down. To this day, I can't explain exactly what we encountered, but I know what I saw and I know what I felt, those red eyes rising from 4 feet to 8 feet tall as it stood up behind that log. That image is burned into my memory forever. Whatever it was, it made one thing perfectly clear. We were the intruders that night, not it. Story 15. This happened in early October 2022, and I'm still having trouble processing it. I've been hunting since I was a kid. My dad taught me everything I know about tracking, moving quietly, and respecting the woods. I'm not someone who spooks easily or makes up stories. I was out squirrel hunting on land I used to own near Hornpain, Ontario. It was one of those perfect fall mornings, crisp air, leaves just starting to turn, that earthy smell of autumn. I knew those woods like the back of my hand. At least I thought I did. I'd been out for maybe 40 minutes, moving slowly and stopping often, the way you do when you're hunting small game. I wasn't having much luck, but I wasn't in a hurry. The woods were quiet except for the occasional bird call and the sound of leaves rustling in the light breeze. I was approaching a small creek that cuts through the property when I noticed some movement about 175 feet away on the other side. At first glance, I thought it was a big wild turkey flapping its wings. We get some monster turkeys up here, and from that distance, with the vegetation partially blocking my view, it made sense. But something felt off immediately. The movement was too fast, too large for a turkey. I froze and raised my binoculars. What I saw next made my blood run cold. The turkey suddenly stood upright. It wasn't a bird at all, but some kind of creature. It was covered in black hair and started running through the brush with incredible speed. Before I could even process what I was seeing, a second creature, much bigger than the first, rose up from behind it. This one had reddish-brown hair, and it followed the first one, moving just as fast. I've spent thousands of hours in the woods. I've seen bears, moose, deer, all kinds of wildlife. These weren't any animals I recognized. They moved like nothing I've ever seen before, bipedal, but with a fluid, powerful motion that was both human-like and completely alien at the same time. The weirdest part, they were completely silent. I mean dead silent. Something that big, the larger one had to be over 8 feet tall, should make noise moving through brush, branches breaking, leaves crunching, something. But there was nothing. Just this eerie, impossible silence as they disappeared into the thick vegetation within seconds. I stood there for what felt like forever, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Part of me wanted to turn around and get the hell out of there, but the hunter in me, the part that needs to understand and identify, won out. I needed to know what they were. I waited a few minutes to make sure they were gone, then cautiously crossed the creek. The water was only ankle deep, but I barely noticed it soaking through my boots. My attention was entirely focused on where I'd seen them. When I reached the spot, I found indentations in the soft ground and flattened grass where they'd been, but no clear footprints, nothing I could photograph or show to someone else as proof. Just these vague depressions that could have been made by anything. Looking up, I noticed a chokecherry tree with berries at about the height where I'd first seen the movement. That's when it clicked. What I initially thought was wing flapping was actually the smaller creature reaching up to gather berries while crouching down. It must have sensed me somehow and alerted the larger one. I tried to follow their path, but it just ended. The trail led straight into this wall of thick brush, and there was no way to see where they'd gone. It was like they'd vanished into thin air or knew exactly how to move through the vegetation without disturbing it. I'm not ashamed to admit I was scared. Not just in that moment, but in a deeper way that's hard to explain. It was like discovering the woods I thought I knew had been hiding something from me all these years. The smaller one, with the black hair, was probably 6.5 feet tall. The reddish-brown one was massive, easily over 8 feet. Their hair was long enough that I could see it moving as they ran, especially on the bigger one's arms and shoulders. It wasn't fur like on a bear. It was more like human hair, but longer and covering their entire bodies. I never saw their faces. They were moving away from me the whole time, and they moved so damn fast. But the way they stood, the way they ran on 2 legs, their massive size, I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, and I can only come to one conclusion. I saw 2 Sasquatch that day. I know how that sounds. Before this, if someone had told me they saw Bigfoot, I'd have smiled politely while thinking they were full of crap. But I know what I saw. These weren't bears standing up. They weren't people in suits. No human could move that fast through dense brush, and no costume could replicate the natural way their hair moved as they ran. The smaller one seemed to detect me first. Maybe it heard me or smelled me, I don't know. But it alerted the larger one somehow, without making a sound that I could hear, and they both took off in perfect coordination. After searching the area for about 20 minutes and finding nothing conclusive, I decided to head back. The woods suddenly felt different, watchful, secretive. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like I was being observed. I didn't hear or see anything else unusual, but that feeling of being watched stayed with me until I reached my truck. I sat there for a while, trying to make sense of what had happened. I've replayed it in my mind countless times since then. I've researched similar sightings in the area. I've questioned myself, wondering if I somehow misinterpreted what I saw. But I know what I saw. The silence is what haunts me the most. How can something that large move through the forest without making a sound? Even the most experienced hunters make noise moving through brush. These creatures glided through it like ghosts. I haven't told many people about this. My wife knows, and a couple of close friends who won't judge me. Most people would think I'm crazy or making it up. I get it. I would have thought the same thing before. But this experience changed me. I used to feel completely comfortable in those woods, like I belonged there. Now I stay closer to the main trails when I hunt. I don't go as deep into the remote areas anymore. There's a healthy respect, maybe even fear that wasn't there before. Sometimes I think about going back to that exact spot, maybe setting up a trail camera. But another part of me doesn't want to know. What if I saw them again? What if they saw me? They clearly wanted to avoid human contact. Maybe it's better to leave it that way. I don't have any dramatic conclusion to this story. No final confrontation or revelation, just a brief encounter that lasted maybe 15 seconds, but changed how I see the wilderness forever. Those woods that I thought I knew so well are now filled with questions and possibilities I never considered before. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm just sharing what happened because I need to tell someone who might understand. I saw something that day that I can't explain, something that shouldn't exist according to everything I thought I knew about the world. And the hardest part is knowing that no matter how many times I tell this story, I'll never have proof of what I saw. The woods keep their secrets well, maybe too well. All I know is that I'm not the same person who walked into those trees that morning, and sometimes when I'm lying awake at night and the house is quiet, I swear I can feel that same sensation, like I'm being watched by something that knows how to stay hidden, something that's been there all along, just waiting for us to notice. Story 16. I still haven't been able to explain what happened that night in November 2020, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. My wife Sarah thinks we should just forget about it and move on, but I can't. Whatever was in those woods behind our house changed everything, especially Rocky. We'd been living in our small two-story house outside Bradford, Pennsylvania for about 3 years by then. It was perfect for us. Me, Sarah, our 2 kids, Emma, who was 9, and Tyler, who was 7, and Rocky, our black lab. The house wasn't anything fancy, but it sat on nearly 2 acres that backed right up to this massive stretch of forest that went on for miles. We loved the privacy, the quiet, being away from the noise and bustle of even our small town. Rocky was the best dog we'd ever had, protective but gentle with the kids. He'd chase anything that came into our yard, deer, raccoons, stray cats. He'd bark his head off and run after them until they were gone. Nothing scared that dog. He was like our unofficial security system. November in Pennsylvania gets dark early, and it was already pitch black outside by the time I was getting ready for bed around 10:30 that night. Sarah was already upstairs reading, and the kids had been asleep for hours. I let Rocky out for his last bathroom break like I always did, just a normal night routine. I was brushing my teeth when I first heard it, Rocky barking outside. Now, Rocky barking wasn't unusual, but this sound was different. It wasn't his normal, "Hey, get out of my yard" bark. This was high-pitched, almost panicky. In the 5 years we'd had him, I'd never heard him make a sound like that. I remember spitting into the sink and calling out to Sarah, "Something's wrong with Rocky." She came downstairs and we both went to the kitchen window that overlooked the backyard. Rocky was standing about 20 yards from the house, completely rigid, facing the tree line. His tail wasn't wagging. It was stiff and straight out, even from inside. I could see the fur standing up along his spine. The weird thing was what happened next. Rocky just stopped barking. Mid-bark, he went silent, and then everything else did too. It was the strangest thing I've ever experienced. 1 second there were all the normal nighttime sounds, crickets, some distant owls, the wind in the trees, and the next second, absolute silence, like someone had hit a mute button on the world. Sarah grabbed my arm. "What's happening?" she whispered. I couldn't answer because I didn't know. That's when we heard it. This sound. I've tried for 2 years to find the right words to describe it, but I still can't quite nail it. It was deep, really deep, like it came from something with a massive chest cavity. A roar, but also a scream. It started low and then rose in pitch, lasting maybe 5 or 6 seconds. It was loud enough that I felt it in my chest, like when you stand too close to a speaker at a concert. Rocky backed up a few steps, which shocked me. This dog, who'd chase a bear if it came in our yard, was retreating. He was making this low, growling sound. I'd never heard from him before. I was about to open the door to call him in, when there was this enormous cracking noise from just beyond the tree line. It sounded exactly like a tree being snapped in half. Not cut, snapped. It was so loud, it echoed off the hills around our property. Sarah jumped and let out a little yelp. Rocky started barking again, but he wasn't advancing toward the woods like he normally would. Instead, he backed up closer to the porch, still facing the tree line, still barking his head off. "Rocky!" I called out, opening the door just enough to stick my head out. "Rocky, come!" He bolted for the door so fast he nearly knocked me over getting inside. Once in, he paced around the kitchen, whining and looking back at the door. Sarah was white as a sheet. "James, what was that?" she asked. "I don't know," I said, but I was already thinking about the stories I'd heard from some of the old-timers in town. Stories I'd always laughed off. We locked every door and window in the house that night. I kept getting up to check the windows, convinced I was hearing heavy footsteps on the gravel path behind our garage. It sounded like something big was circling the house, but every time I looked out, I couldn't see anything in the darkness. None of us slept well. Rocky refused to go to his bed in the laundry room. Instead, he kept pacing between the kids' rooms, occasionally growling at nothing we could see or hear. The next morning, I noticed Rocky was limping. When I checked him over, I found these long scratches along his side and a deep bruise near his ribs. It looked like something had hit him, hard. There was no blood, just this nasty purple bruise that made him yelp when I touched it. After the kids left for school, I worked up the courage to check out the tree line. Sarah begged me not to go, but I had to see what had happened out there. "Just take the gun," she insisted. So I grabbed my shotgun from the safe, more to make her feel better than anything else. Rocky, who normally would be running circles around me on any outdoor expedition, refused to come. He stood on the porch, ears down, tail tucked, watching me walk toward the woods. I'd never seen him act like that before. When I reached the edge of the trees, I immediately saw the damage. There were branches broken all over the place, hanging down at odd angles. And then I found what had made that cracking sound. A tree about 8 inches thick had been snapped clean in half, about 6 feet up from the ground. Not cut with a saw, not knocked over at the roots. Snapped like a twig. The break wasn't clean either. It was jagged and twisted, like something had grabbed it and wrenched it apart with enormous force. That's when I noticed the ground. The soil near the broken tree was soft, and there were indentations in it. Footprints, I guess you'd call them, but unlike any I'd ever seen. They were huge, easily 18 inches long, with what looked like 5 distinct toe shapes at the front. The stride between them was massive too, like whatever made them had legs twice as long as mine. I'm not an expert tracker or anything, but I've hunted deer in these woods for years. I know what deer tracks look like, what bear tracks look like. These weren't either of those. They weren't human either. Too big, too wide, toes all wrong. I took some photos on my phone, though they didn't really capture the scale well. I wish I'd thought to put something down for reference. As I was heading back to the house, I noticed something else that made my skin crawl. There was a flattened circle of grass right at the edge of the woods, facing our house, like something had been sitting or lying there, watching us. The grass was pressed down in a rough oval shape, much bigger than what a deer or even a bear would make. When I got back to the house, Rocky was still on the porch, still anxious. He sniffed me all over when I approached, like he was checking to make sure I was okay, or maybe smelling if whatever was out there had gotten on me. Over the next few days, we kept Rocky inside after dark. I installed some better outdoor lights that covered more of the yard and wood's edge. The kids picked up on our anxiety and started asking questions, so we just told them there might be a bear in the area and to stay close to the house when playing outside. About a week after it happened, the normal nighttime sounds returned to the woods. Gradually, things seemed to go back to normal, except for Rocky. He never returned to his old self. He stopped wanting to investigate the woods. When we'd let him out, he'd do his business quickly, always keeping his distance from the tree line, always watching. I talked to a few of the old-timers in town, carefully, without mentioning exactly what had happened. Just casual conversations about strange things in the woods. 3 of them, separately, told me stories about the Pennsylvania Bigfoot, encounters that had happened over the years, descriptions of screams and broken trees and massive footprints. One guy, Ron, who'd lived here his whole life, just nodded knowingly when I mentioned the sudden silence in the woods that night. "When everything goes quiet all at once," he said, "that's when you know something's watching you." It's been nearly 2 years now. We've never had another encounter like that night. Part of me is relieved, but another part keeps wondering if it's still out there, watching our house from the edge of the woods. Rocky still won't go near the forest edge. That's what convinces me more than anything that what happened was real. Dogs don't lie, and they don't forget. Whatever was in those woods that night was powerful enough to break a thick tree in half, make a sound that shook the air, and scare the bravery right out of the most fearless dog I've ever known. I don't have any answers, just questions that keep me up some nights. What was it? Why did it come so close to our house? Was it curious? Territorial? Did it hurt Rocky? Or did Rocky hurt himself running away? And the question that bothers me most, will it come back? All I know for sure is that something changed that night in November. The woods behind our house aren't just woods anymore. There's something else now, a place where the unexplainable happened, where something watched us from the darkness, and Rocky knows it too. Story 17. I've been hesitating to share this for a long time. What happened last summer in Mount Hood National Forest still gives me chills, and I'm not someone who scares easily. I've worked in meat processing for 8 years, so blood and guts don't bother me. But this was different. It was late August when me and 4 buddies, Mike, Darren, Chris and Tyler, decided to go camping. We're all outdoorsy guys who've been friends since high school, and we try to do a big camping trip every summer. This time I had something extra planned, a kind of experiment. At the meat processing facility where I work, we had a bunch of waste that was headed for disposal, goat and beef entrails, plus a whole sheep carcass that had been rejected for processing. Instead of letting it go to waste, I asked my boss if I could take it for a wildlife experiment. He didn't care as long as I disposed of it properly, so I loaded a 55-gallon plastic drum into my truck bed and filled it with the remains. The smell was already pretty rank, but I sealed it tight with ratchet straps. My plan was simple. I wanted to see what kind of scavengers we might attract if we put out a massive gut pile in the wilderness. I'd been watching those trail camera videos online where people bait areas and capture amazing wildlife footage. I figured we could set it out, hang back at a safe distance, and document what came to feed. We picked a spot about 20 miles from the nearest town, deep in Mount Hood National Forest. The drive-in was gorgeous, towering Douglas firs and that clean mountain air. We found a clearing about 100 yards from a small creek that looked perfect for our base camp. The area was surrounded by forest on 3 sides, with a ridge rising about 300 yards behind us. Setting up camp went smoothly. We pitched our 5 individual tents in a rough circle around the fire pit, got the camp kitchen set up on a portable table, and stacked firewood. The sealed drum stayed in the truck bed. No sense in attracting critters before we were ready. The smell was getting stronger in the August heat, but the lid kept most of it contained. After a dinner of grilled steaks and beers around the campfire, we stayed up telling stupid stories until about 11 that night. Nothing unusual happened during the day, Just your typical camping trip with the guys. We all turned in, planning to hike the next day and save the experiment for our third day out. I'd been asleep for maybe 2 hours when it happened. From the ridge behind our camp came the most chilling sound I've ever heard in my life. It was a scream, but not like any animal I've ever heard, and I've spent plenty of time in the woods. It wasn't an owl, wasn't a mountain lion, wasn't a bear. The scream was long and drawn out, starting deep and rising to a higher pitch before tapering off. The sound had a quality to it that suggested massive vocal cords, like something with a chest cavity much larger than a human's. I bolted upright in my sleeping bag, heart pounding. The scream came again maybe 5 minutes later, exactly the same pattern, exactly the same spot on the ridge. By this point, I could hear movement in the other tents. Mike whispered from his tent, "What the actual fuck was that?" Nobody had an answer. The third scream came about 10 minutes after the second one. We all sat in silence listening, but whatever made the sound didn't come any closer. After about 30 minutes of tense waiting, the forest returned to its normal nighttime sounds. Crickets, the occasional owl, the rustle of wind through the trees. None of us slept well after that. At breakfast, we all looked like shit, red-eyed and jumpy. We debated what could have made the sound, with theories ranging from elk to mountain lions to some weird atmospheric phenomenon. Tyler, always the joker, suggested it was Bigfoot, which got him pelted with marshmallows from last night's s'mores. The day was uneventful. We hiked a nearby trail, fished a bit at the creek, and tried to convince ourselves that last night was no big deal. But I noticed all of us kept looking over our shoulders and nobody wandered off alone. The drum in my truck was really starting to reek now. The August sun beating down on the black plastic had accelerated the decomposition inside. The lid was bulging slightly from the gases. That night, we built a bigger fire than necessary and stayed up later. Nobody wanted to be the first to go to bed. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and we all turned in around 1 in the morning. I woke up at what my watch said was 3:37 a.m. What pulled me from sleep was the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy footsteps, moving around the perimeter of our camp. These weren't the light steps of a deer or even the plodding of a black bear. These were heavy, deliberate footfalls that slightly shook the ground. Whatever it was big. Then came 3 distinct knocks, like someone taking a solid branch and hitting it against a tree trunk. Knock, 30 seconds passed. Knock, another 30 seconds. Knock. The sound came from the darkness just beyond the dying embers of our campfire. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, barely breathing. After the knocks, the footsteps moved away toward the direction of my truck where the drum sat. I heard a faint sniffing sound, then silence. When I was sure the whatever it was had gone, I whispered to Darren in the next tent over, "Did you hear that? The walking and the knocks?" He whispered back, "Yeah. What the hell, James?" Eventually morning came. None of us mentioned the night's events immediately, like we were afraid speaking about it would make it more real. It wasn't until Mike went to the camp table to start breakfast that we had evidence something strange had happened. "Guys, look at this," he called out. We gathered around the table. One corner of the thick plastic folding table had what looked like a bite mark through it. Not like a small animal gnawing on it. This was a single bite impression that went clean through the plastic, with what looked like teeth marks forming a U-shaped pattern. The table was rated for 300 pounds of weight, and something had bitten through it like it was sampling a cookie. Chris, who'd been silent most of the morning, finally spoke up. "I think it's time we talked about what's happening here. Something's out there, and it's interested in us." That's when I told them my suspicion, that whatever was out there was probably attracted by the smell from my truck. The drum's seal was still intact, but the odor was definitely leaking out. We debated packing up and leaving, but Tyler pointed out that if something wanted to hurt us, it had plenty of opportunity during the night. Plus, I'd come all this way to do my experiment, and part of me was intensely curious now. So we decided to stay our final night as planned, but to implement the experiment that day rather than waiting. After breakfast, we drove my truck about half a mile from camp to a clearing near the timberline where we'd have good visibility. It took all 4 guys to help me lift the drum out and pry off the lid. The stench that hit us was unbelievable. Even working at a meat processing plant hadn't prepared me for the concentrated smell of entrails that had been fermenting for days in August heat. We dumped the contents in a pile at the edge of the clearing, a slithering mass of intestines, organs, and the partially decomposed sheep carcass. Within minutes, flies were swarming the pile. We retreated to camp, planning to come back the next morning before we left to see what had fed on the remains. Throughout the day, I kept expecting to hear that scream again, but the forest was strangely quiet. Too quiet, actually. Like the normal wildlife had cleared out of the area. That night around the campfire, the mood was tense. Nobody wanted to address the elephant in the room, that we'd potentially baited something large and unknown with a massive pile of meat. The forest remained unnaturally silent. No crickets, no owls, nothing. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just paranoia. It was a primal sensation that made the hair on my arms stand up. The others felt it too. We spoke in hushed tones and kept looking into the darkness beyond our fire. We made sure the fire was completely out before turning in, not wanting to give away our position any more than necessary. Surprisingly, the night passed without incident. No screams, no footsteps, no knocks. In a way, that was almost more unsettling. In the morning, we packed up camp efficiently, everyone eager to get back to civilization. Before hitting the road, we drove to check on the gut pile one last time. What we found, or rather what we didn't find, is what still haunts me. The entire gut pile was gone. Not partially eaten, not scattered around by multiple scavengers, completely gone. There were no drag marks showing something had hauled it away, no blood trails, no scattered bones or pieces that scavengers had dropped. The ground looked as if it had been carefully picked clean, with just a darker patch of soil marking where the pile had been. But the most disturbing thing was the smell that hung in the air, not the rotting meat smell. That was gone too. This was something else entirely. A powerful musky odor, like wet dog, mixed with something skunkier and more primal. The smell was so thick it seemed to have physical presence, like walking through a fog. It clung to our clothes and skin. As we stood there trying to process what we were seeing and smelling, Tyler broke the silence. "Guys," he said quietly, "no bear or mountain lion could eat that much in one night without leaving a trace." We all knew what he was thinking, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. Whatever had taken that massive pile of entrails, and a whole sheep carcass was big, methodical, and unlike any normal forest scavenger. We got in our vehicles and left quickly after that. The smell seemed to follow us, clinging to our clothes, even as we drove with the windows down. I had to throw away the shirt I was wearing that day. No amount of washing could get that musky odor out. I've gone over that trip 1,000 times in my head. The screams from the ridge, the heavy footsteps around our camp, the wood knocks, the bitten table, and finally, the completely vanished gut pile and that unforgettable smell. I can't say for certain what we encountered in Mount Hood National Forest, but I know it wasn't a bear, wasn't a cougar, wasn't any normal woodland creature. Whatever it was intelligent enough to investigate us carefully before taking the bait we unwittingly provided, and it was powerful enough to remove every trace of several 100 pounds of meat in a single night. I haven't been camping since. Story 18. I still can't believe it's been almost 50 years since this happened. I've told this story to a few close friends over the years, but I've never really put it all down in writing before. I guess I should start by saying that I'm not the type of person who believes in monsters or makes up stories for attention. Before the summer of '75, I was just a normal 14-year-old kid in Bellevue, Nebraska. That summer, I had my first girlfriend, Jennifer. We'd hang out at her place until her parents started giving us the look around 9:30 or 10 at night. Her house was about a mile from mine, and there was this shortcut I'd take through an open field that bordered a dense line of trees. Those trees eventually connected to Fontanelle Forest, which runs all the way to the Missouri River. During the day, it was a beautiful walk. At night, it was different. The first night it happened was in early July. It was hot and sticky, the kind of summer night where your t-shirt clings to your back. I'd stayed at Jennifer's until about 10, and her dad had given me that look that said it was time to go home. The field was lit only by the moon and stars, but I'd walked that path so many times I could practically do it blindfolded. I was about halfway across when I heard it. Footsteps, heavy ones, coming from the tree line to my right. At first, I thought it might be a deer or something, but deer don't make that kind of noise. These were heavy, deliberate steps. And the weirdest part? They seemed to be matching my pace exactly. I'd take 3 steps, and I'd hear 3 heavy footfalls from the trees. When I stopped, whatever it was stopped too. I stood completely still for maybe 30 seconds, my heart pounding in my chest. Nothing, not a sound. Then I took 1 slow step forward. Thud. 1 heavy step from the trees. I took another. Thud. Another from the trees. I'm not ashamed to admit that I freaked out. I ran the rest of the way home, not looking back once. The footsteps followed me, pounding through the trees, keeping perfect pace with me until I reached the street. Then they stopped. When I got home, I was sweating and out of breath. My mom asked if I was okay, and I just said I had raced myself home. I didn't want to sound crazy. I tried to convince myself it was just some guy messing with me, or maybe my imagination playing tricks. The next night, I stayed at Jennifer's again. I almost asked her dad to drive me home, but I didn't want to seem like a wimp. Plus, I'd convinced myself that whatever happened the night before was just a one-time thing. Maybe some local kid trying to scare me. I was wrong. As soon as I hit that field, it started again. The same heavy footfalls from the tree line, matching my pace, step for step. Stop when I stop, go when I go. This time, I tried to be brave. I called out, "Who's there?" My voice cracked like I was still going through puberty. No answer, just the sound of something large shifting its weight in the darkness of the trees. I tried walking faster. It walked faster. I slowed down. It slowed down. It was like this thing was locked onto me, perfectly mirroring my movements. The trees were maybe 30 yards away from the path I was on, and whatever this was stayed in the cover of darkness. I couldn't see anything, just hear those heavy steps crushing the underbrush. The second night, I didn't run. I walked as fast as I could without breaking into a full sprint, and I didn't look back. The footsteps followed me all the way to where the field met the street, then stopped. When I got home, I locked the door behind me and checked all the windows. I didn't sleep well that night. By the third night, I was genuinely scared. I thought about asking Jennifer's dad for a ride again, but I was 14 and trying to look tough. Stupid, I know. I considered taking a different route home, but the alternatives would add another 20 minutes to my walk. In the end, I decided to cross that field one more time, but I brought a pocket knife with me. Looking back, that tiny knife wouldn't have done much good against what was waiting for me. It was another hot night, a bit cloudy this time with the moon playing hide and seek behind the clouds. As I approached the field, my stomach was in knots. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous, that there was nothing to be afraid of. I made it about a quarter of the way across the field when I heard them again, the footsteps, but this time something was different. They weren't just matching my pace from the tree line. They were moving, coming toward me on an intercept course. Then the smell hit me. God, I'll never forget that smell as long as I live. It was like rotting meat and wet dog, combined with something else I can't even describe. It was so strong, it made my eyes water. I froze in place, my hand clutching the pocket knife in my jeans. The footsteps kept coming, heavy and purposeful. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I could feel something massive moving toward me from the trees. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I had this overwhelming feeling of being watched, of being hunted. Then it happened. Something unseen passed directly in front of me, so close I could feel the air shift. It was like time slowed down. I couldn't see anything clearly, just a massive dark shape momentarily blocking out the distant lights from houses beyond the field. The stench was overwhelming now, and I could hear deep, rhythmic breathing. Not like a person, more like a large animal, but different somehow. I don't remember deciding to run. My body just took over. 1 second I was frozen in fear, and the next I was sprinting across that field like my life depended on it. I could hear it behind me, moving fast, much faster than something that big should be able to move. I reached my backyard fence and vaulted over it without even thinking. I landed hard on the other side, twisting my ankle, but the adrenaline was pumping so hard I barely felt it. I was about to make a dash for the back door when something made me stop and turn around. Our motion sensor floodlight had clicked on, bathing the backyard in harsh white light. And there it was, standing by our clothesline pole. I'll never forget what I saw. Never. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall, towering over our 6-foot clothesline pole. Its body was covered in dark brown hair or fur, matted in some places. It had an enormous chest and shoulders that seemed to hunch forward slightly. Its arms... God. Its arms were so long, hanging almost to its knees. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was shadowed with the light behind it, but I could see eyes reflecting the light like a cat's eyes do at night, except higher up than any animal I'd ever seen. For 15 or 20 seconds we just stared at each other. I was too terrified to move. It made no sound, just stood there, watching me. Then it shifted its weight, and the floodlight caught more of its features. I saw a broad, flat nose and a heavy brow ridge. No snout like a bear. This was something else entirely. I backed away slowly, fumbling behind me for the door handle. My eyes never left the creature. When my hand finally found the knob, I yanked the door open and practically fell inside, slamming it shut and locking it. My mum came running, asking what was wrong. I was hyperventilating, pointing at the back door, trying to find words. She looked out the window but said she didn't see anything. By the time I could speak again and got her to look out the back door, whatever it was had vanished. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept staring out my bedroom window, watching the backyard, half expecting to see that thing standing there, looking up at me. I didn't tell my parents the full story. I just said I thought I saw something in the yard and got scared. I didn't want them thinking I was crazy. The next day I went to Jennifer's early. I was a mess, jumpy at every sound. Her mom noticed and asked what was wrong. I don't know why, but I told her everything. I expected her to laugh or tell me I had an overactive imagination. Instead, she got really quiet and said, "Sounds like you ran into Missouri Mo." When I asked what she meant, she explained that Missouri Mo was a local nickname for a creature that had been spotted over the years, particularly near the Missouri River and along the edges of Fontanelle Forest. Some people called it Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but around Bellevue, some of the old-timers called it Missouri Mo. Jennifer's mum told me her uncle had seen it while fishing along the river back in '62, said it watched him from the tree line for nearly an hour before disappearing into the woods. There were other stories too. Campers hearing strange calls in the night, hunters finding enormous footprints that didn't match any known animal. I never took that shortcut again. For the rest of the summer, I walked the long way around, sticking to well-lit streets, even though it added 20 minutes to my trip. Jennifer and I broke up before school started that fall, but it had nothing to do with what happened. We were just kids. I'm 59 now, and I've had a lot of time to think about what I saw that night. I've read about bears standing on their hind legs, about people's minds playing tricks on them in the dark. I've considered every rational explanation. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard following me those 3 nights. I know what I smelled. And to this day, I refuse to walk through dark fields at night. I won't go hiking alone, and camping is completely out of the question. Some things stick with you, change you forever. Was it really what people call Bigfoot? I don't know. All I know is that something was in those woods that summer. Something big, something intelligent enough to stalk me, to understand my patterns, to know exactly when and where to intercept me. And sometimes, on hot summer nights when the windows are open, I swear I can still smell that stench of rotting meat and wet dog, carried on the breeze from the direction of Fontanelle Forest. And I wonder if Missouri Mo is still out there, watching and waiting in the darkness,